Clara Winters stood on the dusty platform of Silver Creek Station, her trunk at her feet and determination etched into every line of her face. The train that had carried her across 2,000 miles of American wilderness disappeared around the bend, leaving her alone with nothing but the echo of its whistle. The year was 1879, and like countless women before her, she had traveled west as a mail-order bride, carrying little more than a letter of agreement and fragile hopes for a new beginning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The man who was supposed to meet her, Harold Thornton, a shopkeeper who had written such promising letters, was nowhere to be seen. Around her, the small frontier town of Silver Creek sprawled under the merciless Montana sun, a single main street lined with weathered buildings that had seen better days, just like the people who inhabited them. "Miss Winters?" a voice called finally. Clara turned to see a portly man in an ill-fitting suit hurrying toward her, mopping his brow with a handkerchief that had long ago lost its whiteness. "I'm Mayor Prentice. I'm afraid there's been a situation." Clara's gloved hand tightened on her parasol. "What kind of situation, Mr. Prentice?" "Where is Mr. Thornton?" The mayor's eyes darted nervously. "Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private." "I prefer directness, sir," Clara replied, her Boston accent sharp against the frontier drawl. "Please tell me what's happened." The mayor shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Thornton has reconsidered the arrangement." "Reconsidered," Clara repeated, the single word carrying the weight of her 2,000-mile journey, the sale of her family home after her parents' death, and every hour spent imagining a new life in the West. "Yes, well, upon learning of your imminent arrival, he expressed concerns that a woman of your background might not adjust well to frontier life." The mayor couldn't meet her eyes. "He's decided to seek a bride with more conventional expectations." A small crowd had gathered, pretending not to listen while doing nothing else. Clara felt heat rising in her cheeks, but not from embarrassment, from fury. Harold had received her letters, knew she was the daughter of a professor, educated and outspoken. He had claimed to admire her spirit. "I see," Clara said, her voice steady despite the storm within. "And did Mr. Thornton bother to inform me of this reconsideration before I traveled across the entire country?" "He intended to write, but things move slowly out here." The mayor trailed off, aware of how inadequate the excuse sounded. Clara took a deep breath, feeling the eyes of the townspeople on her. Among them was a tall figure standing in the shadow of the station roof, a man dressed in dark clothing, his face partially obscured by a worn hat. Unlike the others, he wasn't pretending not to watch. He observed openly, his stance relaxed yet somehow alert. "Well, Mr. Prentice," Clara said finally, "since I'm here and Mr. Thornton is apparently indisposed by his cowardice, perhaps you can direct me to a hotel where I might consider my options." A murmur ran through the onlookers. Women didn't speak so boldly here, especially not newcomers with nowhere to go and no one to depend on. The mayor looked pained. "The hotel? Well, there's been some trouble with the roof after the spring rains. Mrs. Wilkins at the boarding house might have a room, but she's very particular about single women, and—" "I'll take her," a voice interrupted, deep and gravelled from the shadow. "Of the station." The crowd parted as the tall stranger stepped forward. Up close, Clara could see a face weathered by sun and hardship, with eyes the color of storm clouds and a scar that ran along his jawline. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something magnetic about his presence that made it impossible to look away. "Excuse me," Clara said, gripping her parasol tighter. "To the boarding house," the man clarified, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Mrs. Wilkins won't turn you away if I bring you." "And you are?" Clara asked, raising an eyebrow. "Ethan Blackwood. I do odd jobs around town." His eyes held hers steadily. including helping lost souls find shelter. Mayor Prentice looked between them nervously. Mr. Blackwood, I'm not sure this is appropriate. More appropriate than leaving. A lady stranded with night coming on, Ethan countered, his tone deceptively mild. Unless you're offering your home, Mayor? The mayor flushed. My wife would never— Mrs. Wilkins it is, then, Ethan said with finality, then turned to Clara. That is, if the lady agrees. Clara studied him, weighing her limited options. There was something dangerous about this man, but not, she sensed, to her. I would appreciate the escort, Mr. Blackwood. Ethan nodded once, then picked up her trunk as if it weighed nothing. This way, Miss Winters. As they walked down the main street, Clara felt the stares of the townspeople following them. She heard whispers, too, about her, about the man beside her. They seem quite interested in us, she observed. Small towns run on gossip and suspicion, Ethan replied, especially when it comes to strangers. Are you a stranger here, Mr. Blackwood? A shadow crossed his face. I've been in Silver Creek 3 years, but to some I'll always be a stranger. Clara nodded, understanding more than he might think. In Boston, after her parents died and the creditors came, she'd become a stranger in the city where she'd spent her entire life. Former friends crossed the street to avoid her, invitations dried up, and teaching positions mysteriously went to less qualified applicants. Mr. Thornton, she said after a moment, what do you know of him? Ethan's jaw tightened. Enough to say you're better off without him. Because? Because a man who lacks the courage to face a woman he's wronged isn't worth crossing the street for, let alone crossing a continent. They stopped in front of a neat white house with green shutters and a small sign announcing rooms to let, respectable persons only. Wait here, Ethan said, setting down her trunk. Mrs. Wilkins is particular. Clara watched him climb the steps and knock. The door opened to reveal a thin woman with iron-grey hair pulled into a severe bun. Her expression upon seeing Ethan was far from welcoming, but he leaned close, speaking words Clara couldn't hear. The woman's eyes darted to Clara, narrowed, suspiciously, then back to Ethan. After a moment of apparent internal struggle, she gave a curt nod. Ethan returned to Clara's side. You have a room for the night. I've told Mrs. Wilkins you're a teacher who's had a misunderstanding with her. Prospective employer. That's remarkably close to the truth, Clara observed. Truth's easier to remember, he replied with a shrug. She'll want references eventually, but this buys you time. Clara studied him. Why are you helping me, Mr. Blackwood? For the first time. Ethan seemed at a loss for words. Finally, he said, not everyone in Silver Creek is like Thornton. Some of us believe a woman with spirit is an asset, not a liability. Before Clara could respond, Mrs. Wilkins called impatiently from the porch. Ethan carried Clara's trunk to the door, tipped his hat, and was gone before she could properly thank him, leaving her with more questions than answers about the mysterious man who seemed to be the only person in Silver Creek willing to offer her help. That night, as Clara lay in the narrow bed of her rented room, she found herself thinking not of Harold Thornton's betrayal, but of storm-grey eyes and a voice that spoke of lost souls finding shelter. Outside her window, the vast Montana sky blazed with stars unseen in Boston's smoke-filled skies. And for the first time since stepping off the train, Clara felt something besides anger and humiliation. Curiosity about what tomorrow might bring in this dust-blown town at the edge of the wilderness. Morning in Silver Creek arrived with harsh clarity, sunlight streaming through the threadbare curtains of Clara's rented room. She dressed quickly in her second-best traveling suit, navy blue with modest white trim, and pinned her chestnut hair into a practical bun. Her reflection in the spotted mirror showed a woman composed but tired, the strain of yesterday's humiliation lingering in the shadows beneath her hazel eyes. Mrs. Wilkins provided a breakfast of weak tea and dry toast, served with a generous portion of scrutiny. "Mr. Blackwood says you're a teacher," she said, her tone making it clear she found this claim dubious at best. "I was," Clara confirmed, spreading a thin layer of butter on her toast. "I taught at the Whitmore School for Young Ladies in Boston." "And what brings a Boston schoolteacher all the way to Montana territory?" Mrs. Wilkins pressed. "Besides the misunderstanding Mr. Blackwood mentioned." Clara met the landlady's suspicious gaze. "An opportunity for advancement that appears to have fallen through. I now find myself in need of employment," Mrs. Wilkins sniffed. "Not much call for fancy Eastern education here. Most folks are just trying to keep body and soul together." "I'm sure there are children who need teaching, Mrs. Wilkins, even on the frontier. School term doesn't start for months, and the town council won't hire an unmarried woman from back east with no references they can verify." The older woman's expression softened fractionally. "It's not personal, Miss Winters. It's just how things are done here." Clara sipped her tea, mind racing. Her funds wouldn't last more than 2 weeks at Mrs. Wilkins' rates. The return train ticket she'd prudently purchased would take her back to Boston, but to what? An empty house sold to pay her father's debts, former friends who'd abandoned her when her family's financial ruin became public knowledge. Is there anyone in town who might need assistance of a different nature? I can keep accounts, write correspondence, organize. The mercantile might. "Need help?" Mrs. Wilkins interrupted, collecting Clara's barely touched plate. "Though I should warn you, it belongs to Harold Thornton's brother." Clara's fingers tightened around her teacup. "I see. There's also the newspaper, the Silver Creek Sentinel. Miss Jenkins runs it since her father passed last winter. She might appreciate another educated woman's help, though it doesn't pay much. A newspaper that held promise." "Thank you, Mrs. Wilkins. I'll inquire there first." The landlady nodded briskly. "One more thing, Miss Winters, about Mr. Blackwood." Clara raised an eyebrow, waiting. "He's not the sort of acquaintance a respectable woman cultivates in Silver Creek. He may have helped you yesterday, but you'd be wise to keep your distance." "Why is that?" Mrs. Wilkins glanced toward the window, lowering her voice. "People have long memories here, especially for men who've ridden with outlaws." Clara's surprise must have shown on her face. "Oh, yes," Mrs. Wilkins continued with grim satisfaction. "Ethan Blackwood rode with the Bennett gang for years before he showed up here claiming to have reformed. 3 years, and most still don't trust him further than they can throw him. Only reason he's tolerated is he keeps to himself, and Sheriff Miller vouches for him." Clara digested this information. "Thank you for the warning, Mrs. Wilkins." Outside, Silver Creek revealed itself as a town of stark contrasts. Despite the early hour, saloons were already doing business alongside a small white church whose steeple seemed to reproach its neighbors. Women in practical frontier garb walked past others in surprisingly fashionable dresses. Cowboys and miners mingled with merchants in suits. The Silver Creek Sentinel occupied a narrow building wedged between the assayer's office and a gunsmith. A bell jangled as Clara entered, announcing her presence to the diminutive woman hunched over a printing press in the back. "Be with you in a moment." The woman called without looking up, her hands moving with practiced precision as she arranged type. Clara waited, taking in the organized chaos of the newspaper office. Stacks of papers and correspondence covered every surface. Typesetting equipment competed for space with reference books and half-empty coffee cups. The walls were covered with newspaper clippings, maps, and notes pinned haphazardly. Finally, the woman straightened, pushing ink-smudged fingers through short-cropped auburn hair. She was younger than Clara had expected, perhaps 25, with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles and a practical work apron covering. Her simple dress, "Madeline Jenkins," she introduced herself, wiping her hands on a rag. "What can I do for you?" "Clara Winters." I've just arrived from Boston and find myself in need of employment. Mrs. Wilkins suggested you might need assistance. Recognition dawned in Madeline's eyes. You're Harold Thornton's mail-order bride, the one he left stranded at the station. Heat rose in Clara's cheeks. Word travels fast. It's a newspaper office and a small town, Madeline said with a hint of a smile. That's a deadly combination for privacy. She gestured toward a cluttered desk. Please sit. Coffee? Thank you. Madeline poured 2 cups from a pot that had seen better days. So, Boston, what did you do there? I taught at a girls' school. Literature, composition, some history and mathematics. Educated then? That's rare enough around here. Madeline sipped her coffee. Can you write? Yes, that was my specialty. Type? I'm familiar with typewriters, though I wouldn't claim expertise. Madeline nodded thoughtfully. The Sentinel needs help, that's certain. Since Father died, I've been writing, editing, typesetting, and printing single-handedly. Distribution too, when my usual boy falls ill, which is more often than not. I'd be willing to learn whatever's necessary, Clara offered. Madeline studied her over the rim of her cup. It's not just about ability, Miss Winters. This town can be challenging for women who don't conform to expectations. I manage because I was born here, and my father was respected. You're already at a disadvantage. Because of Harold Thornton? Partly. But more because you're educated, independent, and clearly not easily cowed. Silver Creek claims to want progress, but many here fear change, especially when it wears a skirt. Clara smiled despite herself. You seem to manage. At a cost, Madeline replied, her expression turning serious. I'm considered eccentric at best, a troublemaker at worst. I publish what needs publishing, not what's comfortable. It's cost me friendships, potential suitors, even advertising revenue. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Yet you continue, Clara observed. The truth matters, Madeline said simply. Especially here where lies can take root and grow wild if not checked. She set down her cup decisively. I can offer you work, Miss Winters, but not much pay. Room and board at my place above the office, if Mrs. Wilkins proves too expensive, and a small wage when subscriptions allow. That sounds more than fair to start, Clara said, relief flooding through her. Before you accept, Madeline warned, you should know association with me, and the Sentinel won't make your life easier in Silver Creek. Quite the opposite. Clara thought of Boston, of the whispers that had followed her after her father's death, of doors that had closed in her face. I'm familiar with difficulty, Miss Jenkins. It and I are old acquaintances. The bell jangled again, and both women turned to see Ethan Blackwood filling the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the morning light. His eyes moved from Clara to Madeline, and something like approval flickered across his face. Miss Jenkins, he greeted, stepping inside and removing his hat. Miss Winters, I see you've found each other. Mr. Blackwood, Madeline acknowledged, with a nod that was neither friendly nor hostile. What brings you to the Sentinel? Another complaint from Mayor Prentice about my editorial choices? Nothing so dramatic, Ethan replied, though your piece on the water rights dispute has the cattle barons in quite a state. Good. It was meant to. Madeline turned to Clara. Mr. Blackwood occasionally provides information for the paper, things people would rather keep hidden. Clara raised an eyebrow. A man of many talents, it seems. Just observant, Ethan said. His gaze lingered on Clara. You're settling in, then? Miss Winters has just agreed to join the Sentinel, Madeline answered for her. Starting immediately. Ethan nodded, something like satisfaction crossing his features. A good fit. He turned back to Madeline. I came to tell you there's trouble brewing at the Sweetwater Ranch. Cattlemen are making threats against the homesteaders. Again, Madeline frowned, reaching for a notepad. Details, please. Names, specific threats. As they spoke, Clara observed the easy familiarity between them. Not friendship exactly, but mutual respect, rare enough for a former outlaw, if Mrs. Wilkins was to be believed. The conversation concluded, Ethan turned to leave but paused at the door. Miss Winters, a word. Clara joined him outside, squinting in the bright sunlight. Yes, Mr. Blackwood? You should know, he said quietly, that your former intended has been spreading talk about you, claims you misrepresented yourself in your letters. Anger flashed through Clara. That's rich, considering he's the one who failed to mention his aversion to women with opinions. Thornton's well connected here, Ethan warned. His family practically built this town. Working for the Sentinel puts you opposite him and his interests. Are you suggesting I shouldn't have accepted Miss Jenkins's offer? No. His eyes met hers directly. I'm saying you should be prepared for what's coming. Silver Creek takes sides, and you've just chosen one. Clara straightened her spine. I chose mine the moment Harold Thornton decided I was too strong-willed, without having the courtesy to tell me to my face. Unexpectedly, Ethan smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered face. I thought you might say that. He settled his hat back on his head. Miss Jenkins is good people, stubborn as a mule but honest. You could do worse for an ally. And you, Mr. Blackwood? Where do you stand in Silver Creek's divisions? His smile faded, replaced by an expression Clara couldn't quite read. I stand apart, Miss Winters. It's safer that way. He tipped his hat and turned to go. Mr. Blackwood, Clara called after him. Thank you for your help yesterday and for your warning today. He paused without turning. Everyone deserves a chance, Miss Winters, even in a town that's forgotten how to give them. Clara watched him walk away, his tall figure drawing eyes and whispers from passers-by. A former outlaw who helped a stranded woman, a newspaper editor who published uncomfortable truths, and now herself, a rejected bride turning rejection into opportunity. Perhaps, Clara thought as she returned to the organized chaos of the Sentinel office, Silver Creek was exactly where she needed to be after all. 3 weeks passed swiftly. As Clara settled into life at the Silver Creek Sentinel, she moved from Mrs. Wilkins' boarding house to the small apartment above the newspaper office, sharing the modest space with Madeline. The work was demanding, endless, hours of writing, editing, and learning the intricacies of the printing press, but Clara found herself thriving in ways she hadn't since before her parents' deaths. You have a gift for this, Madeline remarked one evening as they reviewed Clara's latest article on the town council's questionable allocation of road repair funds. You find the truth without drawing blood. Unlike you, Clara teased, now comfortable enough with her employer to speak frankly. Madeline grinned, pushing her spectacles up her nose. I believe in the surgical approach. Cut deep, extract cauterize if necessary, hence your reputation as Silver Creek's most beloved gadfly. Someone has to hold the powerful accountable. Madeline stretched, rubbing her ink-stained fingers. Speaking of which, Harold Thornton has requested a meeting tomorrow, says he wants to discuss advertising rates. Clara's stomach tightened. Despite 3 weeks in Silver Creek, she had managed to avoid a direct encounter with the man who had rejected her sight unseen. Would you prefer I make myself scarce? Absolutely not, Madeline replied firmly. You're part of the Sentinel now. Besides, she added with a mischievous glint, I want to see his face when he realizes you're the one who wrote that piece about merchants overcharging for Eastern goods. Clara laughed, despite her apprehension. You're terrible. I'm honest, Madeline corrected. There's a difference. The next morning dawned cool and clear, with autumn beginning to touch the distant mountains with gold. Clara dressed with particular care. choosing her most professional-looking dress, a deep green wool that brought out the amber flecks in her eyes. If she was going to face Harold Thornton, she would do so looking every inch the composed professional. Woman she was, not the abandoned bride he might expect. She was organizing subscription records when the bell above the door jangled. Clara looked up to see a man she recognized immediately from the wanted poster Madeline had shown her. A sketched likeness that captured the self-importance but missed the weakness around the mouth. Harold Thornton was younger than she'd expected. Perhaps 30, with thinning hair carefully arranged to disguise the fact and clothes that spoke of wealth with a touch too much ostentation for true taste. Miss Jenkins, He stopped abruptly when he saw Clara, color draining from his face. Mr. Thornton, Clara greeted him with professional detachment. Miss Jenkins will be with you momentarily. May I offer you coffee while you wait? Thornton stared, his composure faltering. You're working here? Miss Winters is my associate editor, Madeline announced, emerging from the back room with impeccable timing. She's been a tremendous asset to the Sentinel. You had mentioned advertising rates? Thornton's eyes darted between the women, his discomfort palpable. Yes, though perhaps another time would be better. Nonsense, Madeline interrupted. Briskly, Miss Winters handles all our advertising accounts. She's implemented a much more equitable rate structure based on business volume rather than personal connections. It's been quite successful. Clara smiled placidly, opening the ledger. We've had a 30% increase in advertising revenue this month alone. How many column inches were you interested in, Mr. Thornton? Thornton's face had reddened considerably. This is highly inappropriate, he said stiffly. Mayor Prentice assured me that the unfortunate misunderstanding upon your arrival had been resolved, that arrangements were being made for your return east. The only misunderstanding, Clara replied evenly, was my expectation of basic courtesy from my prospective husband. As for returning east, I find Silver Creek has opportunities I hadn't anticipated. You can't possibly intend to stay, Thornton blustered. A woman of your background simply doesn't belong here. My background as an educated, capable professional? Clara raised an eyebrow. Strange. That's precisely why Miss Jenkins hired me. Madeline crossed her arms, watching the exchange with undisguised enjoyment. Did you actually want to discuss advertising, Mr. Thornton, or did you just come to ensure Miss Winters had properly removed herself from your sphere of existence? Thornton drew himself up, attempting dignity. I had hoped to support the local paper, despite your recent editorial choices. But I see the Sentinel has taken a decidedly partisan stance. We've taken a stance for truth and accountability, Clara corrected him. If you find that partisan, perhaps you should examine why. This town has worked a certain way for decades, Thornton snapped. Outsiders like you come in thinking you understand our ways, but you don't. There's a natural order to things here. With the Thornton family conveniently at the top of that order, Madeline inquired sweetly. The bell jangled again, and Ethan Blackwood stepped inside, his tall frame momentarily blocking the sunlight. He assessed the situation in one swift glance, his expression remaining neutral, even as tension crackled in the air. Blackwood, Thornton acknowledged coldly. Thornton, Ethan replied, his voice deceptively mild. Interrupting the lady's work? Business. Discussion, Thornton said tersely, though I'm sure a man of your history wouldn't understand the complexities of commerce. Something dangerous flickered in Ethan's eyes, but his voice remained calm. I understand plenty about complexities, Thornton, including the complex reasons certain merchants charge triple Eastern prices while paying half rate for local goods. Thornton's jaw tightened. You should be careful about making accusations, Blackwood. Men with pasts like yours shouldn't throw stones. I'm not throwing anything, Ethan said quietly. Just delivering these to Miss Jenkins. He placed a packet on the counter. Information about the water rights issue she requested. Names, dates, property transfers. All very official, all very interesting. Madeline took the packet, a slow smile spreading across her face as she glanced at its contents. "This is excellent, Mr. Blackwood. This will make quite the follow-up story." Thornton's face had gone from red to white. "What information? What property transfers?" "Public records," Ethan replied innocently. "Tax assessor's office keeps remarkable files. You'd be surprised what you can learn just by asking politely." Clara watched the exchange with growing fascination. There was clearly history here beyond what she knew, something personal between these men. "We'll be running the story in Monday's edition," Madeline added cheerfully. "Unless, of course, you'd like to provide comment beforehand, Mr. Thornton. The Sentinel always strives for balanced reporting." Thornton snatched his hat from the counter. "My family built this town," he said, his voice low and threatening. "We were here when there was nothing but dirt and dreams. You do well to remember that before you print whatever lies and distortions you're planning. History isn't ownership, Mr. Thornton," Clara said quietly, "and the truth isn't a distortion even when it's uncomfortable." Thornton's eyes locked with hers, and for a moment Clara saw something beneath the bluster, fear perhaps, or the wounded pride of a man unaccustomed to challenge. Then it vanished, replaced by cold anger. "You'll regret staying in Silver Creek, Miss Winters," he said. "All of you will." With that, he stormed out, the door slamming behind him. A moment of silence followed his departure before Madeline burst into laughter. "Oh, that was worth every subscription we'll lose," she gasped. "His face when he saw you, Clara." Even Ethan's mouth quirked into a half-smile. "I'd say he got off lightly. You were remarkably restrained, Miss Winters." Clara released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "What's in that packet that upset him so much?" Madeline's expression turned serious as she spread the documents on the counter. "Records showing the Thornton family has been secretly buying up water rights through shell companies, then transferring ownership to block homesteaders from access. They're trying to starve out small farmers to expand their cattle operation. It's not just the Thorntons," Ethan added. "Half the town council is involved, including Mayor Prentice. They've been planning this for years." Clara studied the documents, her journalist's mind already organizing the information into a compelling narrative. "This could ruin them if it becomes public." "That's the idea," Madeline said firmly. "People are losing their livelihoods, their homes. Some have already been forced to sell at a fraction of their land's worth." Ethan's expression had turned grim. "Violence is coming if this continues. The homesteaders are desperate, and desperate people do desperate things." "How did you get these?" Clara asked him. "Legally," he assured her. "The county records office in Helena keeps duplicates of all property transfers. I have connections there willing to help." Clara noticed he didn't elaborate on those connections. "This explains Thornton's threat just now. He knows what we have, which means we need to be careful," Ethan warned, his gaze intensifying. "Both of you. The Thorntons don't take kindly to threats to their power." "We are not threatening," Madeline objected. "We are reporting facts. To men like the Thorntons, that's the same thing." Ethan turned to Clara. "You've made an enemy today, one with influence and resources." Clara thought of Boston, of the creditors who had dismantled her family's life piece by piece after her father's death, of former friends who had abandoned her when her social standing collapsed. "I'm familiar with powerful enemies, Mr. Blackwood. They're not as frightening the second time around." Something like admiration flickered in his eyes. "Still, take precautions. Don't work here alone, especially after dark." "Are you offering your protection, Mr. Blackwood?" Clara asked, surprising herself with the boldness of the question. Ethan hesitated, and for a moment the mask of calm detachment slipped, revealing something raw and complicated beneath. "I'm offering a warning, Miss Winters. Silver Creek has secrets darker than water rights disputes. Thornton just reminded me how easily those secrets can surface. Madeline cleared her throat. Well, on that cheerful note, we have a newspaper to publish. Clara, could you start organizing these documents? While I finish the front page layout. As Clara sorted through the damning evidence of corruption, she couldn't help glancing occasionally at Ethan, who stood by the window watching the street with the alertness of a man accustomed to danger. There was something almost protective in his stance, though whether that protection extended to the newspaper office in general, or to her specifically, Clara couldn't say. "You don't have to stay, Mr. Blackwood," she said finally. "I'm sure you have other matters requiring your attention." His gaze remained on the street outside. Thornton went straight to the sheriff's office after leaving here. That usually means trouble's brewing. For the Sentinel, for anyone he sees as opposing him. Ethan turned to face her. "How much has Madeline told you about Silver Creek's recent history?" "Some," Clara replied. "I know the town has grown rapidly since the railroad came through, that there's tension between the old cattle families and the newer homesteaders." Ethan nodded. "What she probably hasn't told you is that 3 homesteaders have died under suspicious circumstances in the past year. All ruled accidents by the coroner, a man who happens to be Mayor Prentice's brother-in-law." Clara's blood chilled. "You're suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything," Ethan interrupted quietly. "I'm telling you that powerful men will do whatever necessary to maintain their power. The story you're preparing to publish threatens that power directly." Madeline had emerged from the back room, her expression grave. "That's why we have to publish it, Ethan. If we don't, who will?" "I'm not saying don't publish," Ethan clarified. "I'm saying be prepared for the consequences." Clara looked between them, sensing again that current of shared history. "You've done this before," she realized. "Challenged the town's power structure together." "Once or twice," Madeline admitted. "The Sentinel has always stood for truth, even when it's inconvenient. And, Mr. Blackwood," Ethan's expression turned distant, "let's just say I have personal reasons for wanting certain truths exposed." Before Clara could press further, the door opened again. This time it was Sheriff Miller, a weathered man with gray-streaked hair and tired eyes that had seen too much frontier justice. "Madeline," he greeted with a nod. "Miss Winters, Blackwood." "Let me guess," Madeline said dryly. "Harold Thornton has filed a complaint about harassment." The sheriff sighed. "Something like that. Claims you 3 were threatening him with false allegations." "The allegations are documented," Clara said, gesturing to the papers spread across the counter. "Public records don't lie, Sheriff." Miller glanced at the documents without touching them. "I'm not here about water rights, ma'am. I'm here because Thornton claims Blackwood made threats of physical harm." Ethan's expression didn't change. "Did he specify these alleged threats?" "Said you implied knowledge of his business practices could be dangerous to his health." "That's absurd," Clara objected. "Mr. Blackwood simply delivered documents Madeline requested. If Mr. Thornton felt threatened, it was by the truth they contain, not by any words spoken." Sheriff Miller studied her with newfound interest. "You're, quite the defender, Miss Winters. Known Blackwood long, have you?" "Long enough to know when someone's being falsely accused," Clara replied firmly. The sheriff's gaze moved between the 3 of them, assessing. Finally, he sighed again. "Look, I don't want trouble in my town. Whatever you're planning to publish, Madeline, just make damn sure every word can be proven. The Thorntons won't take kindly to public embarrassment. Is that a warning, Frank?" Madeline asked, her tone carefully neutral. "It's advice from someone who's seen how these things play out." Miller adjusted his gun belt. "Be careful, all of you. Especially you, Blackwood. You know you're walking a fine line in this town." After the sheriff left, a heavy silence filled the newspaper office. Clara looked at her companions, aware that she was missing vital pieces of context. Would someone care to explain what just happened? Madeline and Ethan exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, Madeline nodded. "I think it's time you knew the full story, Clara," she said. "About Silver Creek, about the Thorntons, and about why Ethan Blackwood really came to town 3 years ago." Madeline locked the front door of the Sentinel office, turned the sign to closed, and pulled the blinds. The afternoon sun filtered through in thin golden stripes, casting the room in a pattern of light and shadow. "This isn't just about water, right?" she began, gesturing for Clara to sit. "It's about what happened at the Sweetwater Ranch 3 years ago." Ethan remained standing, his back to them, as he watched the street through a gap in the blinds. His shoulders carried a tension Clara hadn't seen before. "The Sweetwater belonged to James Callahan," Madeline continued. "A good man, homesteader, who'd built something fine from nothing but hard work. He had a wife, Sarah, and a daughter, Emily, just 12 years old." Clara noted how Ethan's posture stiffened at the names. "The Sweetwater sits on a natural spring," Madeline explained. "Best water source in the county. The Thorntons wanted it, offered to buy Callahan out multiple times, but he refused. His family had worked that land for 15 years. So the Thorntons took matters into their own hands," Clara guessed, her journalist instinct recognizing the shape of the story before its details emerged. Madeline nodded grimly. "A fire broke out at the ranch house, middle of the night. The official story was that a lantern tipped over. By the time help arrived, James and Sarah were dead. Emily survived only because she was staying with a friend in town." Clara's heart sank. "And the unofficial story?" "The unofficial story," Ethan said without turning, his voice low and tight, "is that 3 men rode out to the Sweetwater that night to convince Callahan to sell. Things got out of hand." "Convince," Clara repeated, understanding the ugly implication. 2 weeks after the funeral, Madeline continued, Mayor Prentice, acting as executor, sold the Sweetwater to the Thornton family for a fraction of its value. Emily was sent east to relatives, convenient for everyone, except the child who lost everything. "That's terrible," Clara said. "But how does this connect to—" "I was there that night," Ethan interrupted, finally turning to face them. The raw pain in his eyes startled Clara. "I rode with those men." The confession hung in the air, heavy with implications. Clara felt her breath catch. "You were part of it?" she asked softly. "I was with the Bennett gang then," Ethan explained, each word seeming to cost him. "Harold Thornton hired us through intermediaries, said he just wanted to scare Callahan, maybe rough him up a bit. I didn't know—" He stopped, composing himself. "I didn't know they planned to burn the place down." Madeline's expression softened with something like sympathy. "Tell her all of it, Ethan." He met Clara's eyes directly. "When I realized what was happening, I tried to stop it. Got a bullet in my shoulder for my trouble. By the time I fought my way inside, it was too late for the Callahans. The fire had spread too fast." Clara processed this, fitting these new pieces into the puzzle of Ethan Blackwood. "So you weren't just a member of the Bennett gang. You were trying to leave it." "Had been for months," he confirmed. "That night decided it. I was done with that life, done with being the weapon other men wielded." "What happened next?" Clara asked, drawn deeper into his story, despite her conflicted feelings. "I testified," Ethan said simply. "Went to the federal marshal in Helena with what I knew. Problem was, there wasn't enough evidence to link the Thorntons directly to the crime. The 2 other gang members disappeared, likely paid off or killed. My word alone wasn't enough, especially given my history. But it was enough to create doubt," Madeline added. "Enough that my father began investigating. The Sentinel ran stories questioning the official account. That's why you came to Silver Creek," Clara realized. "To find evidence, to make it right somehow." Ethan nodded. "Sheriff Miller was a federal deputy then. He believed my account enough to offer me protection if I stayed clean, helped him watch. The Thorntons. 3 years I've been waiting, watching, gathering scraps that might someday be enough. The gravity of what he'd shared settled over Clara. This man had witnessed a terrible crime, had tried to prevent it, and had spent years seeking justice, all while carrying the weight of his failure to save 2 innocent lives. The water rights. Documents, she said. They're part of building a case against the Thorntons. They show a pattern, Madeline confirmed. The same methods used against the Callahans are being used against other homesteaders now. If we can establish that pattern publicly, we might finally get justice for the Callahans, Ethan finished, and prevent the same fate befalling others. Clara considered him thoughtfully. That's why most of the town still treats you with suspicion. They know part of your story, but not all. Rumors spread, Ethan acknowledged, that I was involved with the Bennett gang, that I was somehow connected to the Callahan tragedy. The Thorntons encouraged those rumors, while making sure their own involvement remained shadowed, easier to blame the outsider with a criminal past. But Sheriff Miller knows the truth? He does, Madeline replied. So did my father. They're the reason Ethan wasn't run out of town years ago. And now you know too, Ethan said quietly to Clara, so you understand the risk of publishing that story. The Thorntons have killed to protect their interests before. They won't hesitate to do it again. Clara felt the weight of the decision before them. This wasn't just about water rights or corrupt business practices. It was about murder, about justice long denied, about a man seeking redemption through truth. We have to publish, she said firmly. Not just the water rights story, but all of it. The connection to the Callahan fire, the pattern of intimidation. Madeline frowned. We don't have enough evidence for the Callahan accusations. Not yet. That's libel without proof. Then we publish what we can prove now, Clara insisted, and keep investigating the rest. We make it clear there's more to come. Ethan studied her with an unreadable expression. You understand what you're walking into? The Thorntons won't come. After just me now, they'll target you both. I came west for a new beginning, Clara replied. I thought that meant marriage, stability, the conventional path. Instead, I found something more valuable. Purpose. If standing for truth puts me at risk, so be it. Madeline smiled slowly. I knew I hired you for a reason. We'll need to move quickly, Ethan advised. Once Thornton realizes what we're planning, he'll try to stop it, either by legal means or otherwise. The 3 of them worked through the afternoon and into the evening, Clara drafting the article, while Madeline organized the supporting documents. Ethan remained as lookout, occasionally offering clarifications on the evidence or suggesting ways to frame the revelations for maximum impact. As dusk fell, Clara stretched her cramped fingers, looking up from her work to find Ethan watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. What is it? She asked. You surprise me, he admitted. Most people run from trouble, especially trouble that wasn't theirs to begin with. Perhaps I've had enough of running, Clara replied. In Boston, after my parents died, I watched powerful men dismantle my family's legacy piece by piece. I was expected to accept it quietly, gracefully, to disappear into genteel poverty without complaint. But you didn't. I tried, she said with a rueful smile. I tried playing by their rules, being the proper young lady seeking suitable employment and connections. All it got me was a string of humiliating rejections and eventually a mail-order marriage that fell apart before it began. Ethan leaned against the wall, his posture relaxing slightly. So instead, you're taking on the most powerful family in Silver Creek, armed with nothing but a printing press and righteous indignation. Don't forget my fearsome editing pencil, Clara quipped, surprising herself with the ease of the jest. Truly a weapon to be reckoned with. Unexpectedly, Ethan laughed. a genuine sound that transformed his face, erasing years of care and wariness. Clara found herself smiling in response, struck by how different he looked in that unguarded moment. Madeline emerged from the back room, eyebrows raised at the unusual sound of Ethan's laughter. "If you two are finished, I could use help with the typesetting. We need this ready for the morning edition." The mood sobered as they returned to work, all too aware of the gravity of what they were undertaking. By the time the type was set and the front page laid out, midnight had come and gone. The headline stood in bold relief: "Water rights scheme threatens homesteader livelihoods." "It's done," Madeline said, surveying their work with satisfaction. "First thing tomorrow, we print. By noon, every person in Silver Creek will know exactly what the Thorntons have been doing. And by noon, the Thorntons will be looking for ways to silence us," Ethan warned. "Neither of you should be alone until we see how this plays out." "I'll stay with Clara above the office," Madeline replied. "We'll lock everything up tight." Ethan nodded, but Clara could see he wasn't entirely satisfied with the arrangement. "I'll keep watch from across the street tonight," he said finally, "just as a precaution." "That's not necessary," Clara protested. "It is," he insisted quietly. "You don't know these men like I do." After Ethan left, Clara helped Madeline secure the office before they climbed the narrow stairs to their small apartment. Through the window, she could make out Ethan's silhouette. In the shadows across the street, a solitary sentinel standing guard through the night. "He blames himself," Madeline said softly, following Clara's gaze. "For the Callahans, for not stopping it sooner. Is that why he's so protective? Guilt?" Madeline considered this. "Partly, but there's more to it than that. My father always said Ethan Blackwood was a good man who'd made bad choices for understandable reasons. The longer I know him, the more I believe that's true." Clara thought about the man who had helped her when no one else would, who had spent 3 years seeking justice for a family he couldn't save, who now stood watch through the night to protect 2 women taking on his fight. "I believe it too," she said softly. Sleep came fitfully for Clara that night. Her dreams, a tangled mess of burning homesteads, water rights documents, and grey eyes that held too much history for one man to bear alone. She woke before dawn, unsettled and restless. Unable to return to sleep, she dressed quietly and made her way downstairs to begin the day's work. The printing press awaited, ready to transform their words into a weapon of truth against the Thornton family's years of corruption. Clara paused at the window, looking out at the still dark street. Ethan remained at his post, a shadow among shadows. As if sensing her presence, he looked up, their eyes meeting across the distance. He nodded once, a silent affirmation that all was well. In that moment, Clara felt something shift inside her, a certainty that whatever came next, she was exactly where she needed to be. Dawn broke over Silver Creek with a crimson intensity that painted the sky like a warning. Clara worked the printing press with Madeline, their hands moving in synchronized rhythm as they brought their explosive story to life. Each completed, paper felt like a small victory, a step toward justice long denied. "We'll need to distribute these immediately," Madeline said, checking the growing stack. "Before the Thorntons can organize any interference." Clara nodded, wiping ink from her fingers. "What about Tommy, your usual delivery boy?" "I sent word last night. He should be here soon, but we'll still need to handle the business district ourselves." Madeline glanced toward the window where the first merchants were already opening their shops. "The sooner people read this, the safer we'll be. Public knowledge is our best protection." The bell above the door jangled and both women tensed before, relaxing at the sight of Sheriff Miller. He removed his hat, taking in the stacks of newspapers with a resigned expression. "So you're going through with it," he said, not sounding surprised. "Truth doesn't ask permission, Sheriff," Madeline replied. Miller picked up one of the papers, scanning the headline and first paragraphs. His weathered face revealed nothing of his thoughts. This will cause quite the stir. It's meant to, Clara said. People deserve to know who's controlling their water and why. The sheriff set the paper down carefully. Blackwood talked to you about the Callahan fire, I take it? He did. Then you understand what you're dealing with. Miller adjusted his gun belt. I can't officially protect you based on suspicions and circumstantial evidence. The Thorntons have too much influence with the town council. We're not asking for protection, Madeline said, just for you to do your job when the time comes. Miller's eyes narrowed slightly. I've always done my job, Madeline, even when it wasn't popular or profitable. He settled his hat back on his head. I'll have deputies keeping an eye on things today. That's all I can offer for now. After he left, Clara turned to Madeline. Is he with us or against us? I can't quite tell. Frank Miller walks his own line, Madeline replied. He believes in the law, but he's not naive about how power works in Silver Creek. He'll stand with truth when it matters, but don't expect him to wave our flag. The morning unfolded in a flurry of activity. Tommy arrived, a freckle-faced boy of 12, eager to earn his delivery fee, and took off with bundles of papers for the residential areas. Clara and Madeline divided the business district between them, Madeline taking the east side, while Clara handled the west. The reactions varied as Clara delivered the Sentinel door to door. Some business owners accepted the paper with neutral politeness, others with obvious curiosity. A few, those with known ties to the Thornton family, refused outright, some even warning Clara that she was making dangerous enemies. She had just finished her deliveries and was returning to the Sentinel office when she spotted Ethan across the street, engaged in what appeared to be a tense conversation with Harold Thornton and two men she didn't recognize. Harold's face was flushed with anger, his finger jabbing toward Ethan's chest as he spoke. Clara hesitated, torn between concern and not wanting to escalate the situation. Before she could decide, Ethan caught sight of her. Something in his expression must have alerted the others, because they turned to follow his gaze. Harold's face contorted with fresh rage. "You!" he shouted, starting across the street toward Clara. "You think you can come to my town and spread lies about my family?" Clara stood her ground as he approached, aware of passers-by slowing to watch the confrontation. "Every word in that article is documented, Mr. Thornton. If you have an issue with the content, I suggest you take it up with the county records office in Helena." "You've made a terrible mistake," Harold hissed, close enough now that she could smell whiskey on his breath, despite the early hour. "My family built Silver Creek. We own this town." "No one owns truth, Mr. Thornton," Clara replied steadily. "Not even men who believe themselves above it." His hand shot out, grabbing her arm with bruising force. "You uppity little—" He never finished the sentence. Ethan moved with the fluid speed of someone accustomed to violence, crossing the distance. Between them, in what seemed like a single stride. His hand clamped on Harold's wrist, applying precise pressure until Harold released Clara with a yelp of pain. "Touch her again," Ethan said quietly, "and we'll find out exactly how much influence your family name carries when you're missing teeth." The two men who had been with Harold started forward, but stopped at a sharp gesture from Harold himself. He rubbed his wrist, glaring at Ethan with undisguised hatred. "You're finished in Silver Creek, Blackwood, all of you." His gaze shifted to Clara. "My brother wants to see you at the Mercantile now." "Your brother has no authority over me," Clara replied. "If he wishes to speak with me, he can come to the Sentinel office during business hours like anyone else." Harold's laugh held no humor. "Oh, he'll come to the Sentinel all right, with half the town council behind him." He turned to leave, then paused. "You made your choice, throwing in with these troublemakers. Now you'll see what happens to people who cross the Thornton family." After he stormed off, Ethan turned to Clara, his expression tight with concern. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she assured him, though her arms still throbbed where Harold had grabbed her. "He was trying to intimidate me, that's all." "It's starting," Ethan said grimly. "The pushback. This will get worse before it gets better." They walked back to the Sentinel together, finding Madeline already returned and the office bustling with activity. Several townspeople had come in, requesting additional copies of the paper, and others lingered, discussing the revelations in hushed, urgent tones. "It's working," Madeline said when she spotted them, her eyes bright with triumph. "People are talking, asking questions. Even old Mrs. Peterson, who hasn't missed Sunday dinner at the Thorntons in 20 years, said she always thought something wasn't right about that water rights business." Clara shared her encounter with Harold, watching Madeline's expression. "Grow serious. If they're threatening direct confrontation, we need to be prepared," Madeline said. "They won't just accept this quietly." By mid-afternoon, the initial reaction had evolved into a storm of controversy throughout Silver Creek. People gathered in small groups on street corners, in the cafe outside the saloon, all discussing the Sentinel's explosive story. Some defended the Thorntons as pillars of the community being unfairly attacked. Others expressed outrage at the manipulation of water rights and property records. Clara was organizing subscription records when the door opened to admit William Thornton, Harold's older brother and owner of the town's largest mercantile. Unlike Harold's florid bluster, William carried himself with cold precision, his calculating eyes taking in the newspaper office as if appraising property. "Miss Jenkins, Miss Winters." He nodded to each of them. "I believe we have matters to discuss." Madeline straightened, setting aside her work. "If you're here about this morning's story, Mr. Thornton, we stand by every word." "Of course you do," he replied, his voice smooth as polished stone. "That's not why I'm here." "Then why?" Clara asked directly. William removed his gloves with deliberate care. "To make you an offer. The Sentinel has served Silver Creek for many years, but I fear recent editorial choices have compromised its objectivity. I'm prepared to purchase the paper for a very generous sum, 3 times its market value." Madeline's laugh was sharp and startled. "You want to buy the Sentinel? To silence it?" "To restore its integrity," William corrected smoothly. "To ensure it serves the community's best interests rather than pursuing personal vendettas." "The Sentinel isn't for sale," Madeline said firmly. "Not at any price." William turned his attention to Clara. "Miss Winters, you're new to our community. Perhaps you can help Miss Jenkins see reason. This offer would provide her financial security for life. You both could start fresh elsewhere without the unpleasantness that will surely follow today's regrettable publication." Clara met his calculating gaze directly. "Mr. Thornton, where I come from, we call that a bribe. Here, I imagine it's the same, just dressed in finer clothes." Something dangerous flickered in William's eyes. "I'm trying to resolve this situation amicably, Miss Winters, for everyone's benefit." "There's nothing amicable about trying to bury the truth," Clara replied, "or about threatening those who publish it." "No one has threatened anyone," William said smoothly. "I've simply made a business offer which you're free to decline, but consider this. Silver Creek is a small town. People depend on each other to survive. The mercantile extends credit to most families here. The Thornton Cattle operation employs dozens. The bank, of which I am a principal investor, holds mortgages on most properties in town. The implicit threat hung in the air. Cross the Thorntons and watch your community suffer." "Are you saying you'd punish innocent people because we publish the truth?" Madeline demanded. "I'm saying actions have consequences," William replied. "Even well-intentioned ones." He retrieved his gloves. "Think about my offer. It remains open until tomorrow noon." After he left, Clara expelled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. He's more dangerous than Harold, isn't he? Much more, Madeline agreed grimly. Harold blusters and threatens. William calculates and executes. The bell jangled again, and Ethan strode in, his expression taut. I just passed William Thornton, leaving. What did he want? Madeline explained the offer, while Clara watched Ethan's reaction. His face revealed little, but she caught the tension in his jaw, the slight narrowing of his eyes. He's trying to contain the damage, Ethan said when Madeline finished. Typical Thornton approach. Try to buy what you can't control, destroy what you can't buy. He implied they could make life very difficult for people in Silver Creek, Clara added. Called it consequences. Ethan's expression darkened. That's not a threat they make lightly. I've seen what happens when the Thorntons decide to make examples of people. The door opened once more, admitting Tommy, the delivery boy. His freckled face was flushed with excitement. Miss Jenkins, Miss Winters, there's a town meeting being called at the church. Right now. Mr. Prentice says it's about the water rights, and everybody's got to come. Madeline exchanged glances with Clara and Ethan. They're moving faster than I expected, she murmured, trying to control the narrative before it spreads further. We should go, Clara said decisively. If they're going to address our story publicly, we should be there to defend it. The small church was already packed when they arrived, with more townspeople streaming in from all directions. Mayor Prentice stood at the pulpit, flanked by William and Harold Thornton and several members of the town council. Sheriff Miller stood to one side, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the crowd. As Clara, Madeline, and Ethan entered, a ripple of whispers spread through the gathering. Some faces turned to them with sympathy or support, others with open hostility. They found seats near the back, the only spaces still available. Mayor Prentice raised his hands for silence. Friends and neighbors, he began in his most official voice, we've called this emergency meeting to address the misleading and potentially harmful claims published in this morning's edition of the Sentinel. They're not claims, they're facts, someone called from the crowd. Clara recognized the voice as belonging to Sam Weber, one of the homesteaders whose water access had been restricted. Documented facts, another voice added. The mayor's face reddened. Order, please. Everyone will have a chance to speak, but let's maintain civility. William Thornton stepped forward, his manner calmer and more reasonable than the mayor's. I understand there's concern about water rights management in our community, he said smoothly. The Thornton family has always prioritized sustainable resource allocation for the benefit of all Silver Creek residents. Is that why you've been buying up water rights through shell companies? A grizzled farmer demanded from the front row. For our benefit? William didn't flinch. The consolidation of certain water resources was necessary to prevent overuse and ensure fair distribution. If the Sentinel had approached us before publishing their interpretation of events, we could have explained the complexity of the situation. The documents speak for themselves, Mr. Thornton, Madeline called out, rising to her feet. County records show systematic acquisition of water rights through at least 6 different shell companies, all ultimately controlled by your family. Those same records show homesteaders being denied water access despite prior legal agreements. The sea, crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement. William's expression hardened slightly. Miss Jenkins, the Sentinel has a responsibility to present balanced reporting. Instead, you've chosen sensationalism and personal attacks. The only attack was on the truth, Clara said, standing beside Madeline. Every fact in our story can be independently verified. Harold Thornton pushed forward, less controlled than his brother. This isn't about water rights. This is about outsiders and malcontents trying to undermine the family that built Silver Creek from nothing. Is that what you told James and Sarah? Callahan, before you burned their ranch? The question came from the back of the church, spoken in Ethan's quiet but carrying voice. A shocked silence fell over the assembly. "How dare you?" Harold sputtered, but William placed a restraining hand on his brother's arm. "Mr. Blackwood continues to make these unfounded accusations despite years of investigation finding no evidence." "To support them," William said coldly. "We've been patient with his slander out of respect for Sheriff Miller, but perhaps that patience has reached its limit." "It's not slander if it's true," Ethan replied, standing now as well. "And the truth has a way of emerging, no matter how deep it's buried." The tension in the church had shifted, the meeting veering from its planned course. Clara could see uncertainty in some faces now, curiosity in others. The Thorntons' carefully orchestrated response was unraveling. This meeting was called to discuss water rights, Mayor Prentice interjected desperately, "not to rehash old tragedies." "They're connected," Clara called out. "The same tactics used against the Callahans are being used against homesteaders today. The pattern is clear for anyone willing to see it." William's face had gone cold, his mask of reasonableness slipping. "You've been in Silver Creek barely a month, Miss Winters. You know nothing of our history or our community." "I know enough about powerful men who believe themselves above accountability," Clara replied. "I've seen what happens when no one stands against them." The crowd had grown restless, divided. Some jeered at Clara's words, while others nodded in agreement. Arguments broke out between neighbors, the meeting descending into chaos despite the mayor's attempts to restore order. In the confusion, Clara felt a hand on her arm and turned to find Ethan beside her, his expression grim. "We should go," he said quietly. "This is turning ugly." "Running away?" she challenged. "Strategic retreat," he corrected. "We've done what we came to do, kept them from controlling the narrative. Now we need to prepare for what comes next." Clara glanced at Madeline, who nodded in agreement. The three of them slipped out as the meeting dissolved into competing shouts and accusations, the town's long simmering tensions finally boiling over. Outside, the afternoon had darkened with gathering storm clouds, the air heavy with the promise of rain. They walked briskly back toward the Sentinel, aware of eyes watching from windows and doorways. "That went better than expected," Madeline said as they turned onto the main street. "They wanted to intimidate the town into silence, but instead she stopped abruptly, her words dying on her lips. Ahead of them, smoke rose in a thick column against the darkening sky, smoke coming from the precise location of the Sentinel office. "No!" Madeline whispered, breaking into a run. Clara and Ethan followed, but even before they rounded the final corner, Clara knew what they would find. The Sentinel building was engulfed in flames, the fire already consuming the upper floor where she and Madeline lived. A small crowd had gathered, some attempting to organize a bucket line, while others simply watched in horror or grim satisfaction. "While we were at the meeting," Ethan said, his voice tight with controlled fury, "they made sure we'd be distracted." Madeline stood frozen, watching her family's legacy burn. "Everything," she said numbly. "The press, the archives, all of it." Clara saw movement across the street, William Thornton watching the fire with cold detachment. Their eyes met briefly, his message clear. "This is what happens to those who challenge us." In that moment, as rain finally began to fall in fat, ineffective drops against the raging fire, Clara felt something crystallize within her. Not defeat, but a determination harder and more resolute than anything she'd known before. "They think this ends it," she said, taking Madeline's hand. "But they've just shown everyone exactly who they truly are." Ethan's gaze remained fixed on the burning building, his expression remote yet somehow more revealing than Clara had ever seen it. "This was always their answer," he said quietly. "Fire to silence truth, fire to erase what stands in their way." "Then we'll rebuild," Clara declared, raising her voice to be heard over the crackling flames. "From the ashes, if necessary. The Sentinel will continue, As if in response to her words, a portion of the roof collapsed in a shower of sparks and embers. The crowd gasped, stepping back from the increased heat. Sheriff Miller appeared beside them, his face grim. "I've got witnesses who saw men leaving the back of the building just before the fire started," he said quietly. "Men who work for the Thornton Ranch." "Will you arrest them?" Madeline asked, her voice hollow. Miller's jaw tightened. "I will. This isn't like before. This time we have witnesses. This time they've gone too far." Clara looked up at the smoke, rising into the rain-darkened sky, then across at William Thornton, who had already turned to leave. "No," she said softly. "This time, they've made a mistake. They've made a mistake." The Sentinel's smouldering ruins cast a pall over Silver Creek as darkness fell. Rain had finally extinguished the last flames, leaving behind a blackened skeleton where the newspaper office had stood. Clara, Madeline, and Ethan took shelter in the sheriff's office, huddled around the pot-bellied stove as Miller questioned witnesses. 3 men, a grizzled miner named Jeb Porter insisted, his cap twisted in work-hardened hands. "Saw 'em plain as day slipping out the back just before. The smoke started. 2 of 'em work Thornton's North Pasture, Riker and Ellis. 3rd one I didn't recognize." Sheriff Miller made careful notes. "You testify to this in court, Jeb, under oath?" "Ain't never been one to hold with burning folk out," Porter replied firmly. "My pa was burned out by land grabbers back in Kansas. I'll testify." 2 more witnesses corroborated Porter's account. Miller dismissed them with thanks, then turned to the trio by the stove. "It's enough to make arrests, at least for the arson. Tying it directly to the Thorntons will be harder." "They'll have ensured their hands appear clean," Ethan said, his voice rough with suppressed anger. "Same as with the Callahan fire." "Not quite the same," Miller corrected. "The Callahans died miles from town with no witnesses. This happened in broad daylight on Main Street, with half the town nearby." He set down his pencil. "People are angry, and not just about the fire. Your water rights story struck a nerve, especially with the smaller ranchers and homesteaders." Madeline stared into her coffee cup, her earlier shock giving way to a cold determination Clara hadn't seen before. "Those records were just the beginning. We have copies of everything, stored at my aunt's house outside town." "The Thorntons didn't silence anything by burning the Sentinel." Miller's eyebrows rose slightly. "Smart precaution." "My father taught me never to keep all your evidence in one place," Madeline replied. "Not when dealing with men like the Thorntons." Clara watched the interchange, her mind already moving beyond the immediate crisis. "We need a new press," she said, drawing their attention, "and a temporary office." "Clara," Madeline began gently, "we've just lost everything." "Which is exactly what they wanted," Clara interrupted. "They believe destroying the building destroys the Sentinel itself. We need to prove them wrong, immediately and publicly." "She's right," Ethan said unexpectedly. "The longer the Sentinel stays silent, the more the Thorntons' version of events will take hold." "There's a hand press in the storeroom at the school," Miller offered after a thoughtful pause. "Old thing, but it still works. Teacher uses it for classroom notices." "That would do for a simple broadsheet," Madeline said, straightening as the idea took hold. "We couldn't manage our usual format, but we could get the essential news out." "And our first story is already written," Clara added, with grim satisfaction, "the burning of the Sentinel by Thornton's men." Miller shook his head, though not in disagreement. "You 3 don't back down easy, do you?" "Some things are worth fighting for," Clara replied simply. The sheriff studied them, something like respect in his weathered face. "You'll need somewhere to stay. The hotel's still under repair, and Mrs. Wilkins, they can stay at my place," Ethan interrupted. "It's on the edge of town, easy to defend if necessary." Clara and Madeline exchanged surprised glances. Ethan had never invited anyone to his home in the weeks Clara had known him, Miller's brow furrowed. That might not be wise, given your history. With the Thorntons could make things worse. Or better, Ethan countered. They already think we're working together. Might as well use that to our advantage. No one will approach my property without me knowing. The sheriff conceded with a shrug. Your decision. I'll have deputies watching in shifts regardless. He retrieved his hat from the desk. I'm going to round up Riker and Ellis now. Their arrest will send a message that the town isn't completely under Thornton control. After Miller departed, silence settled over the office, broken only by the soft pop and hiss of the stove. Clara felt the full weight of the day's events pressing down. The confrontation with Harold, the disastrous town meeting, the sight of the Sentinel engulfed in flames. We've lost our home, Madeline said quietly, the reality finally sinking in. Everything we owned was in that building. Clara reached for her friend's hand. We haven't lost what matters most, our resolve. There are spare clothes at my place, Ethan said, his practical nature asserting itself. Nothing fancy but clean. We should go before it gets much later. The road can be treacherous in the dark. Outside, Silver Creek had grown unusually quiet, as if the town itself were holding its breath. A few people still clustered near the Sentinel's ruins, while others hurried about their evening business, with furtive glances over their shoulders. The division Clara had sensed at the town meeting seemed to have deepened, with neighbors regarding each other with newfound suspicion. Ethan led them to a small stable behind the general store, where he kept his horse and wagon. As he hitched the animal, Clara noticed how his movements, normally fluid and precise, now carried an underlying tension. You're worried this will bring trouble to your door, she observed quietly. His hands paused briefly on the harness. Trouble's been at my door since I came to Silver Creek, he replied. I'm more concerned about bringing it to yours. I think that distinction became meaningless when the Sentinel burned, Clara said. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. Fair point. He finished securing the harness, then helped both women onto the wagon seat. It's about 3 miles to my place. Not far, but isolated enough to give us warning if anyone approaches. As they drove through town, Clara felt eyes watching from darkened windows. Word of their departure with Ethan would spread quickly, adding fuel to the already rampant speculation about their connection. She found, somewhat to her surprise, that she didn't care. The opinions of Silver Creek's gossips seemed trivial compared to the truths they were fighting to expose. They traveled in silence for a time, each lost in their own thoughts, as the wagon creaked along the rutted road. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a clear night sky, ablaze with stars and a waxing moon that silvered the landscape. The mountains loomed darker against the horizon, their jagged peaks cutting into the starfield. I came west for this, Clara said softly, gazing upward. Not consciously, perhaps, but this vastness, this sense of possibility, it called to me even from the pages of dime novels and newspaper accounts. And now? Ethan asked, his voice equally quiet in the night. Now I understand that possibility requires struggle, she replied, that freedom has a cost. They crested a small rise, and Ethan's homestead came into view, a modest cabin set against a stand of pines with a small barn and corral nearby. A creek glinted in the moonlight, curving around the property before disappearing into the trees. It's not much, he said, almost apologetically as he drew the wagon to a halt. It's perfect, Clara countered, meaning it. The place had a solid, honest quality that matched its owner, unpretentious but built to endure. Inside, the cabin proved surprisingly comfortable. A central room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. 2 small bedrooms opened off the main room, simply but adequately furnished. Everything was scrupulously clean and meticulously organized, not what Clara had expected from a bachelor's quarters. You and Madeline can take the bedrooms, Ethan said, lighting lamps against the darkness. "I'll sleep out here." Madeline, exhausted by the day's events, accepted with grateful thanks and retreated to one of the rooms after a simple meal of bread, cheese, and cold venison from Ethan's stores. Clara remained by the fire, watching the flames dance with a newfound wariness after the day's conflagration. "You're thinking about the fire," Ethan observed, joining her with 2 cups of coffee. She accepted one with a nod of thanks. "I'm thinking about many things, but yes, the fire among them. The deliberate destruction of something valuable for the sake of silencing truth." "It's their way," he said, settling into a chair nearby. "When words and money fail, they turn to violence." Clara studied him over the rim of her cup, like they did with the Callahans. Ethan's gaze remained on the fire, but she saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. "Yes, you blame yourself for not stopping it," she said. "Not a question, but an observation, wouldn't you?" His eyes met hers finally, stormy with remembered pain. "I knew what kind of men I was riding with. Should have realized sooner what they intended. And yet you tried to stop it at risk to yourself," Clara pointed out. "You've spent 3 years seeking justice for people you didn't even know." "Doesn't bring them back," he said quietly. "Doesn't erase what I was before." Clara set down her cup. "No, but it defines who you are now." She hesitated, then added, "When I agreed to marry Harold Thornton, I knew almost nothing about him. I was running from failure in Boston, grasping at what seemed like my only chance for security. What does that say about who I was?" "That you were human," Ethan replied, "making the best choice available at the time, as were you," she countered. "The difference is that when you saw the truth, you chose to stand against it regardless of cost." Ethan looked away, uncomfortable with her assessment. "Miller was right about one thing today," he said, changing the subject. "This isn't like before. The Thorntons have finally overplayed their hand. You think the tide is turning against them. I think people are finally asking questions they've avoided for years," he replied. "Your story forced them to confront uncomfortable truths. The fire proved those truths were dangerous enough to silence." Clara considered this. "We need to move. Quickly then, strike while doubt is fresh." "First light," Ethan agreed. "We'll go to the school, secure that press. Start printing by noon." They lapsed into companionable silence, the fire crackling between them as the night deepened around the cabin. Clara felt an unexpected peace despite the day's chaos, as if finding this temporary refuge with Ethan and Madeline had clarified something essential that had been clouded before. "I never thanked you properly," she said after a time. "For what?" "For helping me that first day at the station, for seeing something in me worth defending when everyone else saw only an inconvenience." Ethan's expression softened in the firelight. "I recognized something in you," he admitted. "A determination I understood. The look of someone who wouldn't be defined by others' expectations." "Is that why you sent me to Madeline? Because you saw we were alike?" "Partly," he acknowledged, "but also because I knew you'd need allies willing to stand against the prevailing winds. Silver Creek doesn't take kindly to independent women or reformed outlaws." "Yet here we are," Clara said with a small smile. "The rejected bride, the outspoken newspaper woman, and the former gunman, united against the town's most powerful family." "Not the alliance anyone would have predicted," Ethan agreed, a rare smile warming his features. "Perhaps that's our strength," Clara suggested. "They underestimate us because they can't imagine us working together." "They won't make that mistake again after today," Ethan warned. "William Thornton especially. He doesn't forget or forgive perceived slights." "Neither do I," Clara said, her voice hardening as she remembered the sight of the sentinel in flames. "Some actions demand accountability." Ethan studied her with newfound intensity. "You've changed since you stepped off that train." "Have I?" Or has adversity simply revealed what was always there beneath Boston propriety and social constraints? Both, maybe, he conceded. The Clara Winters who arrived in Silver Creek might have been shocked by the Clara Winters plotting rebellion in an ex-outlaw's cabin. She laughed softly, surprising herself with the sound. A fair assessment, though I suspect she would have come around eventually. She was rather desperate for a fresh start. And now, Ethan asked, his voice dropping to little more than a whisper, what does Clara Winters want now? The question hung between them, weighted with possibilities neither had acknowledged before this moment. Clara felt a curious fluttering in her chest that had nothing to do with fear or anger, and everything to do with the way Ethan was looking at her, as if seeing straight through to her core. Justice, she answered finally. Truth. And perhaps. She hesitated, then finished with quiet certainty. A life defined by courage rather than convention. Something shifted in Ethan's expression. A softening, a recognition. He leaned forward slightly, the firelight casting half his face in shadow while illuminating the other in amber warmth. Clara, he began, his voice rough with emotion he'd kept carefully contained until now. A sudden noise from outside interrupted the moment, the distinct sound of a branch snapping. Ethan was on his feet in an instant, hand moving to the gun at his hip with practiced speed. "Stay here," he ordered in a whisper, moving silently to the window. Clara rose despite his instruction, her heart pounding. "What is it?" "Someone's out." "There," he replied, peering cautiously through the glass. "At the edge of the trees." Before either could say more, a flaming arrow arced through the night sky, striking the roof of the small barn with a soft thud. Within seconds, fire bloomed against the darkness, "Wake, Madeline!" Ethan commanded, grabbing his coat. "Get to the creek with buckets, both of you!" Clara rushed to rouse Madeline while Ethan bolted outside. Through the window, she saw him racing toward the burning barn, silhouetted against the growing flames. "What's happening?" Madeline asked groggily, then gasped as she saw the fire through the window. "Not again!" "Someone's attacking the property," Clara explained, searching for buckets. "We need water from the creek." They hurried outside, wooden pails in hand. The night had erupted into chaos, the barn roof fully ablaze now, crackling and spitting embers that threatened to spread to the cabin. Ethan had managed to free his horse from the structure and was now frantically working to contain the blaze. As Clara ran toward the creek, a movement in the tree line caught her eye, dark figures slipping between shadows. She froze, realizing the arsonists were still present, watching their handiwork. "Madeline," she hissed, pulling her friend behind the water trough. "There, at the edge of the trees." Madeline squinted into the darkness. "How many?" "3, maybe 4. They're watching us." A shot rang out, splintering wood near their heads. Both women dropped to the ground as Ethan's voice cut through the night. "Get down!" He appeared beside them in an instant, gun drawn. "Back to the cabin. Now, stay low." "The barn," Madeline protested, "is lost," Ethan finished grimly. "The cabin's defensible. Go!" They scuttled backward, keeping the trough between themselves and the tree line. Another shot cracked through the night, kicking up dirt yards from Clara's feet. Inside the cabin, Ethan immediately doused all lamps, plunging them into darkness, relieved only by the glow of the fire outside. He moved with practiced efficiency, checking his rifle, positioning himself at the window. 3 riders, he reported tersely. "Thornton's men, I'd wager, though too dark to identify them." "Why not just shoot us?" Madeline asked, her voice admirably steady despite the circumstances. "Why the fire?" "Message," Ethan replied. "Same as the Sentinel, a warning that nowhere is safe." Clara joined him at the window, careful to stay to one side. Outside, the barn had become a funeral pyre, flames leaping skyward as the roof began to collapse. The glow illuminated the yard between cabin and tree line, making it a dangerous crossing for anyone approaching or fleeing. "They're trying to draw us out," she realized. "Force us into the open where they have a clear shot." Ethan nodded, his face grim in the reflected firelight. "Standard tactic, flush out the quarry. So we wait them out?" Madeline asked. "We defend," Ethan corrected, passing her a shotgun from a rack near the door. "They'll make a move eventually. Fires attract attention. Someone will see it, maybe ride for the sheriff. They can't linger." Clara had never held a gun, but she understood the gravity of their situation. "What can I do?" Ethan hesitated only briefly before handing her a revolver. "Last resort," he said quietly. "If they breach the door, point and squeeze. It's already cocked." The weight of the weapon felt foreign in her hand, yet strangely right, given the circumstances. "I won't hesitate," she assured him, surprising herself with her certainty. A tense silence settled over them as they waited, each watching a different approach to the cabin. Minutes stretched like hours, marked only by the continued destruction of the barn and occasional shouts from their hidden attackers. "Come out, Blackwood," a voice finally called. "We just want to talk." Ethan's smile held no humor. "Riker," he said softly, "one of the men Porter identified at the Sentinel fire." "You're surrounded," Riker continued. "No way out." "3 men isn't exactly surrounded," Madeline muttered. "They're getting desperate," Ethan observed. "The fire's visible for miles. They need to finish this and disappear." As if confirming his assessment, movement flickered at the edge of the illuminated area, a figure darting between trees, working his way closer to the cabin. "They're trying to flank us," Ethan warned. "Watch the back window, Madeline." A shot shattered the glass beside Clara, sending her ducking instinctively. Ethan returned fire immediately, his shot followed by a cry of pain from the darkness. "Got one," he said grimly. "Winged him at least." "Ethan Blackwood!" a new voice called, deeper, more authoritative than Riker's. "You're harboring fugitives!" "The women are wanted for questioning about the Sentinel fire." "That's Ellis," Ethan told them. "Thornton's foreman, mean as they come." Clara's indignation overrode her fear. "They're accusing us of burning our own newspaper." "Standard Thornton tactic," Ethan replied. "Accuse your victims of your own crimes." More glass shattered as another shot hit the window frame. Ethan pulled Clara away from the wall, his body shielding hers instinctively. "We need to change position," he murmured. "They're getting our range." A new sound cut through the night, hoofbeats approaching rapidly from the direction of town. The attackers heard it too, urgent whispers carried from the trees, followed by the rustling of hasty retreat. "Reinforcements," Madeline breathed. "Sheriff Miller?" Ethan remained tense, gun trained on the window. "Maybe, or more of Thornton's men." They waited, scarcely breathing as the riders drew closer. Then a familiar voice called out, "Blackwood, you in there? It's Miller!" Relief flooded through Clara, though Ethan remained cautious until he'd verified the sheriff's identity through a crack in the door. Finally satisfied, he admitted Miller and 3 deputies, their faces grim in the dying light from the barn fire. "Saw the flames from town," Miller explained. "Figured the Thorntons wouldn't waste time striking back." 3 men, Ethan reported. "Riker, Ellis, and a 3rd I didn't identify. I winged one of them. Checked the doctor's office in the morning." Miller nodded to his deputies, who immediately spread out to search the property. "Anyone hurt?" "Just property," Ethan replied, though not for lack of trying on their part. The sheriff surveyed the smouldering remains of the barn, his expression hardening. "This ends tonight. I've had enough of Thornton justice in my town." Clara watched him curiously. "What changed, Sheriff? You've always been careful to maintain neutrality where the Thorntons are concerned." Miller's weathered face revealed a flickering of something like shame. "Maybe that's been the problem, Miss Winters. A lawman can't be neutral about right and wrong." He adjusted his hat. "I've already arrested Riker and another man for the Sentinel fire." Now I'll be adding attempted murder to their charges. William Thornton will claim you have no proof his men were involved tonight, Madeline pointed out. Let him, Miller replied with unexpected steel. I've got boot prints, bullet casings, and a witness who saw 3 riders heading this way from town. It's enough to start asking hard questions, including why his foreman is suddenly nowhere to be found. One of the deputies returned, holding up a blood-stained bandana. Found this by the east tree line, Sheriff. Someone's bleeding pretty good. Miller took the cloth, examining it in the lantern light. Thornton brand, he confirmed, pointing to a small embroidered T in one corner. Another piece of evidence. They didn't mean to leave behind. For the first time since the attack began, Clara felt the tension begin to ease from her shoulders. The night's danger wasn't over, but at least they weren't facing it alone anymore. What now? She asked, looking between Miller and Ethan. Now, the sheriff said firmly, you 3 are coming back to town with us. You'll stay at my house tonight where I can guarantee your safety. Tomorrow, we'll sort out next steps. Ethan hesitated, clearly reluctant to abandon his home. The cabin. Johnson and Peters will stay, Miller assured him, nodding toward 2 of his deputies. No one will torch it while you're gone. As they prepared to leave, Clara paused beside Ethan, noticing the tightly controlled emotion in his face as he surveyed the destruction of his barn. I'm sorry, she said softly. This happened because of us. Because you sheltered us. Ethan's gaze shifted to her, his expression softening. This happened because of the Thorntons, he corrected, and it changes nothing except making me more determined to see them answer for their crimes, all of them. The ride back to Silver Creek was tense and silent. Despite Miller's assurances, they remained vigilant, expecting ambush from the darkness flanking the road. The town, when they reached it, seemed eerily quiet, though Clara noticed lights burning in windows that should have been dark at this late hour. News traveled fast in small communities. The attack on Ethan's property was already common knowledge. Miller's home proved to be a modest but comfortable 2-story house near the sheriff's office. His wife, a practical-looking woman with kind eyes, received them without surprise, as if taking in refugees from violence was a regular occurrence. "Spare bedroom upstairs for the ladies," she instructed, already heating water for tea. "Cot in. The study for you, Mr. Blackwood. I've laid out towels and spare nightclothes." "Thank you, Mrs. Miller," Clara said, touched by the woman's matter-of-fact kindness. "Martha, please," she corrected with a small smile. "And it's the least we can do. Should have done more sooner, if you ask me." This last was directed at her husband with a pointed look that suggested previous discussions on the topic. Miller accepted the rebuke with a nod. "You were right. As usual," he conceded. "I waited too long to take a stand. Well, you're taking one now," Martha replied, her tone softening. "That's what matters." After a restorative cup of tea and basic medical attention for minor cuts from the shattered glass, Madeline retired upstairs, exhaustion finally claiming her. Clara lingered in the kitchen, her mind too active for sleep despite her body's protests. "You should rest," Ethan advised, finding her still seated at the table after the others had gone. "So should you," she countered. "Yet here we both are." He smiled faintly, taking the chair across from her. For a moment they sat in companionable silence, the events of the long day settling between them like autumn leaves after a storm. "What happens tomorrow?" Clara finally asked. "The Thorntons won't stop because of one failed attack or a few arrests." "No," Ethan agreed. "If anything, they'll escalate. William Thornton doesn't tolerate failure or public embarrassment." "Then, we need to be ready." Clara traced a pattern on the table's worn surface, organizing her thoughts. "The school press, the broadsheet, that's still our first priority. The town needs to know what happened tonight, that the same men who burned the Sentinel tried to silence us permanently." Ethan nodded slowly. "It's a start, But we need more if we're going to break the Thorntons' hold on Silver Creek once and for all. The evidence about the Callahan fire, Clara suggested. You said there wasn't enough to prove the Thorntons' involvement directly. What would change that? A confession from one of the men involved, Ethan replied, or documentation proving they hired the Bennett gang. Clara considered this. The men arrested tonight, Riker and the others, they might be willing to talk, to save themselves. Possibly, Ethan acknowledged, though fear of the Thorntons runs deep. A new thought struck Clara. What about bank records? If the Thorntons paid the Bennett gang, wouldn't there be a record of withdrawn funds around that? Time! Ethan stared at her, something like admiration dawning in his eyes. The Silver Creek Bank. William Thornton is a major investor, but he doesn't run daily operations. The ledgers would show large withdrawals. And if those withdrawals coincide with your arrival with the Bennett gang, it's circumstantial, Ethan cautioned. But combined with testimony from the men arrested tonight, it might be enough to convince a federal marshal to investigate further. Clara felt a surge of hope, the first since watching the Sentinel burn. Then that's our next step after the broadsheet. We need access to those bank records. Not easily done, Ethan warned. The bank manager, Peterson, is firmly in Thornton's pocket. But his assistant isn't, Clara countered. Miss Abigail Parker has been subscribing to the Sentinel since Madeline's first article challenging the town council. She's brought us several tips about questionable business practices. Ethan's expression shifted to one of surprised respect. You've been building allies I didn't even know about. A woman in my position learns to identify potential friends quickly, Clara replied with a small smile. Survival depends on it. Their conversation was interrupted by Sheriff Miller entering the kitchen, his face grave. Just got word, he announced without preamble. William Thornton is calling an emergency town council meeting for tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. About? Ethan asked, though they all suspected the answer. Official response to what he's calling. False accusations and criminal libel by the Sentinel, Miller replied. He's demanding the council revoke your business license, Madeline's printing rights, and... He hesitated, looking uncomfortably at Clara. Authorization to forcibly remove dangerous outside agitators from Silver Creek. Clara felt a chill despite the kitchen's warmth. He means me. And Ethan, Miller confirmed, though he's couching it in terms of public safety and community standards. He can't actually do that, can he? Clara asked. Forcibly remove citizens? Legally? No, Miller said. But with enough council votes and public support, he could make it impossible for you to remain here. No one would rent to you, sell to you, or employ you. It's been done before in frontier towns. Clara's jaw set with determination. Then we need that broadsheet printed before 9 tomorrow. The town needs to know what really happened at the Sentinel and at Ethan's place tonight. I'll help, Miller offered unexpectedly. Martha, too. We can get the school press ready by dawn. Ethan studied the sheriff with cautious approval. You're choosing sides publicly, Miller. No going back from that. Already chose, Miller replied, simply. When I pinned on this badge, I took an oath to uphold the law, not the Thornton family interests. About time, I remembered the difference. As they made plans for the morning, Clara felt a curious lightness despite the danger surrounding them. For the first time since arriving in Silver Creek, she felt truly part of something larger than herself, a community forming not from shared geography, but from shared principles. She glanced at Ethan and found him watching her, his expression, softer than she'd ever seen it. The moment from earlier in his cabin, interrupted by the attack, seemed to hover between them again, full of unspoken possibilities. We should try to rest, he said finally, his voice rough with emotions. He kept carefully contained. Tomorrow will test us all, Clara nodded, rising from her chair. "Good night, Ethan," she said softly. "Thank you for everything." "Clara," he called as she reached the door. She turned back, finding him standing now, his tall frame outlined against the kitchen's warm light. "What you said earlier about wanting a life defined by courage rather than convention." "Yes." His eyes held hers steadily. "When this is over, when the Thorntons have answered for their crimes and Silver Creek can start fresh, I hope you'll still feel that way." Clara understood the question beneath his words, the future he was tentatively offering. "Some decisions," she replied with quiet certainty, "once made can never be unmade. I've chosen my path, Ethan. I don't intend to leave it." A smile, genuine and unguarded, transformed his face. "Good night, Clara," he said simply. As she climbed the stairs to join Madeline, Clara felt the strange sensation of pieces falling into place. Not just in their fight against the Thorntons, but in the larger puzzle of her life. The mail-order bride, rejected for being too strong-willed, had found her strength, her purpose, and perhaps something she hadn't dared hope for. A man who valued that strength rather than fearing it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, perhaps, new dangers. But for the first time since stepping off the train in Silver Creek, Clara Winters was certain she was exactly where she belonged, exactly where Dawn broke over Silver Creek with the clarity that follows a storm. Clara stood before the small hand press in the schoolhouse, her fingers stained with ink as she and Madeline worked feverishly to prepare their emergency broadsheet. Sheriff Miller had secured access to the building hours before first light, and Martha Miller had arrived with coffee and provisions for what promised to be a grueling morning. "The council meeting starts in 3 hours, Ethan announced, checking his pocket watch. He'd spent the night guarding the schoolhouse perimeter, refusing rest despite his own exhaustion. "We'll be ready," Clara assured him, setting another freshly printed sheet aside. The stack was growing steadily, a simple one-page edition with a stark headline: "Thornton violence escalates, Sentinel office burned, armed attack on homestead follows." Madeline looked up from the type she was arranging. "The question isn't whether we can print enough copies, it's whether people will stand with us after reading them." "They will," Clara said with quiet certainty. "Not everyone, perhaps, but enough." Martha Miller, arranging the completed sheets, nodded in agreement. "More folks than you realize have been waiting for someone to challenge the Thorntons openly. They've just been too afraid to be first." "Fear is the Thorntons' greatest weapon," Ethan observed. "More effective than money or political connections." Clara paused in her work, a realization crystallizing. "Then we need to show the town they have nothing to fear, that the Thorntons aren't untouchable." "The arrests are a start," Sheriff Miller said from his position by the window. "Ellis still hasn't returned to town, and his absence is noted. People talk. We need more than talk," Madeline insisted. "We need action." Clara's mind raced ahead, connecting possibilities like puzzle pieces. What about the bank records? If we could present evidence at the council meeting linking the Thorntons directly to the Callahan fire. "Peterson won't release those ledgers," Miller cautioned. "Not willingly. But his assistant might help," Clara countered. "Miss Parker, what time does the bank open?" 8, Martha replied, though Peterson himself rarely arrives before 9. Ethan caught Clara's meaning immediately. That gives us a narrow window. If Miss Parker is willing to help, she could access the records while Peterson is absent. Clara set down her ink-stained cloth. "I'll go speak with her as soon as we finish here. We need specific dates to search. When did the Bennett gang arrive in the area before the Callahan fire?" "October 12th, 3 years ago," Ethan answered without hesitation. "We camped outside town for 3 days before—" He didn't finish. "But he didn't need to." Clara nodded. "So we'd need to check for large withdrawals in early October, particularly around the 9th or 10th. Sheriff Miller looked impressed. "That's solid detective work, Miss Winters." "Just journalism," she corrected with a small smile. "Following the money is basic investigative practice. By 7:30, they had printed over 200 copies of the broadsheet, enough to reach every household in Silver Creek. Tommy, the delivery boy, had arrived with 3 friends, eager to participate in what they clearly viewed as an exciting adventure. "Cover the residential areas first," Madeline instructed them. "Then the businesses. Be quick, but make sure everyone gets a copy." As the boys raced off with bundles of papers, Clara cleaned her hands as best she could and prepared for her visit to the bank. Her appearance was far from the polished professional she'd cultivated since arriving in Silver Creek. Her borrowed dress was rumpled, her hair hastily arranged, and ink stains stubbornly clung to her fingers. Yet she felt a curious confidence as she gathered the remaining broadsides to distribute on her way. "I'll come with you," Ethan said, his tone brooking no argument. "The Thorntons will have men watching the streets this morning." Clara didn't object. Though she valued her independence, the events of the past 24 hours had made clear the very real danger they faced. "Be careful," Madeline urged, embracing Clara briefly. "I'll meet you at the town hall before the council meeting." Outside, Silver Creek was stirring to life, the early risers already moving about their business. Clara noticed how conversations paused as she and Ethan passed, how eyes followed them with expressions ranging from sympathy to suspicion. The attack on the Sentinel had divided the town, with battle lines drawn more clearly than ever before. "People are watching," Clara murmured as they walked, "waiting to see which way the wind blows." "That's frontier mentality," Ethan replied. "Folks learn to align with the strongest force for survival. For too long, that's been the Thorntons. They distributed broadsides as they went, handing them directly to passers-by or slipping them under doors. Some recipients accepted them eagerly, others with wary glances over their shoulders. Outside the general store, they encountered Harold Thornton himself, emerging with a scowl that deepened at the sight of them. "You two have some nerve showing your faces in town after last night's display," he snapped. "Meaning the attempt on our lives by your family's hired men?" Clara countered calmly, offering him a broadsheet. "It's all detailed here, including witness statements." Harold's face flushed with anger. "Lies and slander. The town council will put an end to your troublemaking today." "The council might surprise you," Ethan replied evenly. "Silver Creek is waking up to what your family really is." "We built this town." Harold's voice rose, drawing attention from nearby shoppers. "Everyone here owes their livelihood to the Thornton family. Building something doesn't give you the right to burn it down when it displeases you," Clara said, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "Silver Creek belongs to its people, Mr. Thornton, not to your family." Harold stepped closer, his posture threatening. "You'll regret the day you stepped off that train, Miss Winters. I knew you were trouble the moment I saw your letter. Too educated, too opinionated for your own good." "Yet here I am," Clara replied with a composure that surprised even herself. "Exactly where I need to be." Ethan shifted subtly, positioning himself between Clara and Harold. "You might want to save your threats for the council meeting, Thornton. Too many witnesses here." Harold's gaze darted to the gathering crowd, many now holding the broadsheet and watching the confrontation with undisguised interest. With a final glare, he pushed past them and stormed away. "Well," Clara said as they continued toward the bank, "that should help distribute the news faster than Tommy and his friends ever could." Ethan's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "You handled him well." "Fear is their weapon," she reminded him. "I refuse to be afraid any longer." The Silver Creek Bank occupied an imposing brick building at the town center, a statement of permanence in a place where most structures were still wood. Inside, Clara asked for Miss Parker and was directed to a small desk near the vault. Abigail. Parker proved to be a sharp-eyed woman of about 40, with practical clothing and a no-nonsense demeanor that softened when she recognized Clara. "Miss Winters," she greeted, glancing nervously at Ethan, "I heard about the Sentinel. A terrible business." "More terrible than you know," Clara replied quietly, placing a broadsheet on the desk. "We need your help, Miss Parker." The woman scanned the paper rapidly, her expression growing grave. "This is quite an accusation." "It's the truth," Ethan said. "Every word." Miss Parker studied him carefully. "You're the one they say rode with outlaws." "I did," he acknowledged without flinching. "And that's how I know the Thorntons hired the Bennett gang to intimidate James Callahan 3 years ago. Intimidation that ended in murder." Clara leaned forward, lowering her voice. "We need evidence linking the Thorntons to the gang. Bank records showing large withdrawals in early October 3 years ago." Miss Parker paled slightly. "What you're asking is dangerous," Clara finished. "I know. But people have already died for the Thorntons' greed. More will follow if they aren't stopped." The bank assistant glanced toward the manager's empty office, then back to the broadsheet detailing the attacks. Something in her expression hardened with resolve. "10 minutes," she said finally. "Mr. Peterson will arrive at 9 precisely. Wait by the side entrance. I can't promise anything." Clara and Ethan exchanged relieved glances. "Thank you," Clara said fervently. They waited in the alley beside the bank, the minutes crawling by with excruciating slowness. The town was fully awake now, and Clara could see people gathering in small groups, broadsides in hand, engaged in animated discussion. The news was spreading exactly as they'd hoped. At 5 minutes to 9, the side door opened, and Miss Parker beckoned them inside. Her face was flushed with excitement or fear, perhaps both. "October 10th, she said without preamble, showing them a ledger open to a specific entry. "William Thornton withdrew $5,000 in cash. The entry is coded as equipment purchase, but there's no corresponding invoice or delivery record." Ethan studied the page intently. 5,000 would be the right amount for hiring gun hands like the Bennett gang. "There's more," Miss Parker continued, turning to another marked page. 3 days after the Callahan fire, Harold Thornton deposited nearly the same amount, $4,800, marked as livestock sale proceeds. But there's no record of any major livestock transaction that week. Clara felt a surge of triumph. The remaining payment after the job was done. "Circumstantial," Ethan cautioned, "but combined with my testimony and the pattern established with the Sentinel and the attack on my property, it's enough to take to a federal marshal," Clara finished. "Enough to demand a real investigation." Miss Parker quickly copied the relevant entries onto a sheet of paper, handed it to Clara, then closed the ledger. "Mr. Peterson is coming. You need to go. Now." They slipped out the side door just as the bank manager's voice echoed through the main chamber. Clara clutched the paper like a lifeline as they hurried toward the town hall, where the council meeting would begin in less than 30 minutes. The street outside the town hall was crowded with Silver Creek residents, far more than typically attended council proceedings. Clara spotted Madeline near the entrance, deep in conversation with Sheriff Miller and several ranchers she recognized as homesteaders affected by the water rights dispute. "We found it," Clara told them quietly when they joined the group. Banking records showing payments to the Bennett gang around the time of the Callahan fire. Miller examined the copied entries, his expression grim but satisfied. "This gives us leverage. Combined with the witness statements about last night and the Sentinel fire, it's enough to request a federal investigation." "Will the council listen?" one of the ranchers asked skeptically. "Most of them are in Thornton's pocket." "They'll listen to that," Madeline replied, gesturing toward the growing crowd. Many held the broadsheet, and the mood was decidedly different from the carefully controlled town meeting of the previous day. These were citizens demanding answers, not passive observers. As the town hall doors opened, Clara felt a hand touch hers briefly. She looked up to find Ethan beside her, his expression more open than she'd ever seen it. "Whatever happens in there," he said quietly, "know that you've already changed Silver Creek. You arrived as an unwanted bride and became the catalyst this town needed." Clara's heart swelled with an emotion too complex to name. "We did this together," she corrected. "All of us." They entered the hall as a united front. Clara, Ethan, Madeline, Sheriff Miller, and a growing number of citizens determined to reclaim their town from the Thorntons' iron grip. The council members already seated at the front looked distinctly uncomfortable facing the unexpectedly large and serious crowd. Mayor Prentice called for order, his usual bluster noticeably subdued. William Thornton sat in the front row, his face a mask of controlled anger as he surveyed the scene. Beside him, Harold fidgeted nervously, whispering urgent comments his brother pointedly ignored. "This emergency session of the Silver Creek town council is called to order," Prentice announced. "We have a single agenda item today, a request from William Thornton regarding the operations of the Silver Creek Sentinel newspaper and the status of certain disruptive individuals within our community." Clara stepped forward before William could rise. "Mr. Mayor, I believe recent events have rendered that agenda item obsolete. I request permission to address the council on a matter of public safety and criminal activity." A murmur ran through the crowd as Prentice sputtered in surprise. "Miss Winters, this is highly irregular." "Let her speak," called a voice from the crowd. Others quickly joined in, the volume rising until Prentice was forced to concede with obvious reluctance. Clara moved to the center of the room, acutely aware of every eye upon her. The journey that had begun with rejection at the train station had led her here, to this moment of truth before the assembled town. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "Citizens of Silver Creek," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Yesterday, the Sentinel office was burned to the ground by men working for the Thornton family. Last night, those same men attacked the home of Ethan Blackwood, where Miss Jenkins and I had sought refuge. These are not isolated incidents. They are part of a pattern of violence and intimidation that has controlled this town for far too long." William Thornton rose to his feet. "This is outrageous slander. Where is your proof of these wild accusations?" Sheriff Miller stepped forward. "I've arrested 2 men for the Sentinel fire, Mr. Thornton. Both work for your ranch. I have multiple witnesses placing them at the scene. Disgruntled miners and homesteaders with grudges against successful businessmen," William dismissed. "Hardly reliable witnesses." Clara held up the bank records. "We also have evidence linking your family directly to the death of James and Sarah Callahan 3 years ago. Bank records showing payments to the Bennett gang immediately before and after the fatal fire at their ranch." The crowd's reaction was immediate and vocal. The Callahan tragedy had never been forgotten, merely buried beneath layers of fear and circumspection. Now, with the connection to recent events explicitly drawn, the town's collective anger found a focus. William's composure slipped for the first time Clara had seen. "This is a coordinated attack on my family's reputation," he declared. "These supposed records are obviously fabricated." "The records can be verified by federal marshals," Clara countered, "as can witness testimony from a former member of the Bennett gang who was present that night, a man who has spent 3 years seeking justice for the Callahans." All eyes turned to Ethan, who met William Thornton's glare with unwavering steadiness. "The same pattern used against the Callahans is being used today against anyone who opposes the Thornton family's interests," Clara continued. "First, financial. Pressure through water rights manipulation, then threats. Finally, violence." "You've presented no actual evidence," William insisted, though Clara noticed beads of sweat forming on his brow. "Only circumstantial connections and the word of a known criminal." "Perhaps we should hear from your foreman, Ellis," Sheriff Miller suggested. Except he's mysteriously disappeared after being identified at the attack on Blackwood's property last night. Interesting timing. Mayor Prentice, sensing the shifting mood of the room, attempted to regain control. These are serious allegations that require proper investigation through appropriate channels. The appropriate channel is standing right here, Clara interrupted, gesturing to Sheriff Miller. For years, this town has allowed the Thornton family to operate above the law. Today, that ends. We demand immediate suspension of the water rights consolidation, a full federal investigation into the Callahan deaths, and criminal charges for the arson and attempted murder committed by Thornton employees. The council members exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unprepared for this turn of events. What had been planned as a simple motion to silence troublemakers had transformed into a public reckoning. "This is not a trial," William Thornton declared coldly. "This council has no authority to judge these matters." "No," Clara agreed, "but it has the authority, indeed the obligation, to protect its citizens from those who would harm them. The evidence will be presented to federal authorities, Mr. Thornton. The question today is whether Silver Creek stands with truth or with those who burn newspapers and attack innocent people to silence them." She turned to face the crowd directly. "Every person in this room has a choice to make. Will you continue living under the shadow of fear, or will you reclaim your town? The Thorntons may have built Silver Creek, but they don't own it. Or you." The murmurs grew to a crescendo as people began to speak openly, years of suppressed grievances finding voice at last. Clara stepped back, her part done. What happened next would determine Silver Creek's future and her own. And the council chamber erupted into competing voices as Clara's words resonated through the crowd. Citizens who had silently endured Thornton rule for years found courage in her stand, while those whose livelihoods depended on the powerful family shifted uncomfortably or defended their benefactors. William Thornton remained standing, his composure cracking further as he surveyed the increasingly hostile room. For the first time, he seemed to recognize that his usual tactics of intimidation and financial pressure might not suffice. "Order!" Mayor Prentice shouted, banging his gavel ineffectually. "This meeting will come to order immediately." From the back of the room, a new voice rose above the din, authoritative, resonant, and unmistakably official. "Federal Marshal James Harrison," the voice announced, as the crowd parted to reveal a broad-shouldered man in a dust-covered coat, the silver badge on his chest catching the morning light streaming through the windows. "I believe this meeting concerns matters under federal jurisdiction." Clara exchanged startled glances with Ethan and Madeline. None of them had expected federal intervention so quickly. Sheriff Miller stepped forward to greet the newcomer with evident relief. "Marshal, your timing is impeccable." "Received your telegraph yesterday," Harrison replied. "Rode through the night." His sharp gaze swept the room, settling briefly on each key figure: the Thorntons, the council members, Clara and her allies. "Sounds like I arrived just in time." William Thornton recovered quickly, smoothing his features into a mask of injured dignity. "Marshal Harrison, the Thornton family welcomes federal attention to these slanderous accusations. We have nothing to hide." "Glad to hear it," Harrison replied mildly. "Then you won't mind if I start by taking statements from all parties, examining those bank records Miss Winters mentioned, and interviewing your employees currently in Sheriff Miller's custody." Harold Thornton paled visibly, but William maintained his composure. "Of course, though I must insist these proceedings be conducted properly, not through this public spectacle." "Spectacle?" Clara stepped forward again. "Is that what you call citizens demanding justice, Mr. Thornton? Because from where I stand, it looks like democracy." A rumble of approval ran through the crowd. Marshal Harrison regarded Clara with interest. "You must be the Boston schoolteacher turned journalist I've heard about," he observed. "Your reputation precedes you, Miss Winters." "As does yours, Marshal," she replied, noting how the Thorntons reacted to this exchange with growing unease. "Your work exposing corruption in Nevada mining towns is well documented." Harrison nodded, seemingly pleased by her knowledge. "Then you understand my methods. I believe corruption thrives in darkness and dies in sunlight." He turned to address the assembled townspeople. "This meeting will continue, but under federal oversight. I want to hear every grievance, examine every piece of evidence, and ensure that justice, not influence, determines the outcome." Mayor Prentice sputtered in protest. "Marshal, the town council has procedures which appear to have failed this community for some time," Harrison interrupted flatly. "Sheriff Miller has provided enough evidence of potential criminal conspiracy to warrant my full attention. Over the next 2 hours, Silver Creek witnessed something unprecedented, an open airing of grievances against the Thornton family spanning years of alleged abuses. Homesteaders detailed water access restrictions that threatened their livelihoods. Merchants described preferential treatment and coercive practices at the Thornton-controlled bank. Former employees spoke of intimidation and threats. Through it all, William Thornton sat stonily, occasionally whispering to his increasingly agitated brother. Clara watched the proceedings with growing hope, particularly as Marshal Harrison examined the bank records with professional interest. "These withdrawals and deposits certainly warrant investigation," he announced after reviewing the evidence. "Combined with witness statements regarding the recent arsons and attacks, there's ample justification for formal proceedings." He turned to William Thornton. "Mr. Thornton, I'll need to speak with your foreman, Ellis, immediately." "Ellis is attending to business at our north pasture," William replied smoothly. "I can send word, but it may take some time." "Interesting," Harrison observed, "because my men reported seeing someone matching Ellis's description boarding an eastbound train in Carson City early this morning, almost as if he were fleeing." Harold made a choking sound that his brother silenced with a sharp glance. Marshal Harrison continued relentlessly. "I've also taken preliminary statements from Riker and Hobbs regarding the Sentinel fire. Both men seem eager to reduce their potential sentences by providing information about who ordered the arson." For the first time, William's carefully maintained facade showed genuine cracks. "These are ridiculous insinuations. My family built Silver Creek from nothing. We've provided employment, security, and prosperity. For some," Ethan spoke up, his quiet voice carrying unexpected authority. "Others you've burned out, threatened, or ruined when they stood in your way." "Rich accusations from a known criminal," William shot back. "Former criminal," Harrison corrected. "Mr. Blackwood has cooperated with federal authorities for 3 years regarding the Bennett gang's activities. His testimony carries significant weight in my investigation." The meeting reached its climax when Sam Weber, one of the affected homesteaders, stood to address the council directly. "I've lived in Silver Creek for 15 years, he began, his weathered face solemn. "Raised my family here, helped build the schoolhouse, served on the volunteer fire brigade, never asked for special treatment, just the water rights legally granted in my deed." He paused, gathering courage. "Last month, my creek ran dry because the Thorntons diverted it upstream. My crops withered. When I complained, 2 men visited at night, suggested my barn might catch fire if I made trouble." He looked around the room, meeting his neighbors' eyes. "I stayed silent then because I was afraid. But after reading about what happened to the Sentinel, seeing what these good people have endured for telling the truth, I can't stay silent anymore. None of us should." A hush fell over the assembly as Weber's words sank in. Then one by one, other citizens rose to share similar experiences, each tale building upon the last until the full pattern of Thornton control became undeniable. William Thornton finally stood, his face tight with barely controlled rage. This is nothing but a coordinated attack on successful businessmen by failed farmers and outside agitators. Marshal Harrison, I insist these proceedings be halted immediately. My family will address these accusations through proper legal channels, with our attorneys present. Harrison studied him thoughtfully. That's certainly your right, Mr. Thornton, and I'll be formally documenting all testimony and evidence for those legal proceedings. He turned to Sheriff Miller. In the meantime, I'm authorizing you to place William and Harold Thornton under federal custody pending investigation into arson, conspiracy, and potential charges related to the deaths of James and Sarah Callahan. Harold jumped to his feet. You can't arrest us. We own this town. That, Marshal Harrison replied evenly, is precisely the problem. As Miller and his deputies moved to take the Thorntons into custody, Clara felt a sense of unreality wash over her. The family that had seemed untouchable just days ago was now facing justice before the entire community they had controlled for so long. William went quietly, his cold dignity intact despite the circumstances. Harold required more persuasion, blustering and threatening, until Miller's deputies firmly escorted him from the hall. The council chamber emptied gradually, citizens dispersing to spread news of the morning's dramatic events throughout Silver Creek. Clara remained seated, emotionally and physically exhausted, yet filled with a profound sense of accomplishment. You did it, Madeline said, squeezing her hand. You actually did it. We did it, Clara corrected, echoing her earlier words. To Ethan, all of us together. Marshal Harrison approached, removing his hat respectfully. Miss Winters, I owe you thanks. My office has suspected Thornton corruption for some time, but gathering evidence in a town they controlled proved challenging. Will the charges stand? Ethan asked, joining them. The Thorntons have connections beyond Silver Creek, political allies, business partners. Money and influence can complicate justice, Harrison acknowledged. But with multiple witnesses now willing to testify, bank records showing suspicious transactions, and the pattern of intimidation clearly established. Yes, I believe these charges will stand, especially those related to the recent arsons, where the evidence is strongest. Clara felt a weight lift from her shoulders, and the water rights manipulation. I've already dispatched riders to notify all affected landowners that their original water access rights are reinstated, pending full legal review, Harrison assured her. No one else will lose crops or livestock while this investigation proceeds. After the marshal departed to oversee the Thorntons' transfer to the federal jail in Carson City, Clara found herself alone with Ethan in the now empty council chamber. Madeline had gone to meet with Tommy and his friends about distributing an update to their broadsheet, leaving an expectant silence between them. What happens now? Clara asked, voicing the question that had been forming since the dramatic conclusion of the meeting. Ethan leaned against the council table, his posture more relaxed than she'd ever seen it. For Silver Creek, healing begins. The Thornton holdings will likely be managed by court-appointed trustees during the investigation. The town council will need rebuilding with members not compromised by Thornton influence. And for us, Clara pressed gently. He met her gaze directly. The walls he'd maintained for so long finally lowered completely. That depends on what you want, Clara. I came west looking for a new beginning, she said, moving closer to him. A place where I could build something meaningful. I thought that meant becoming Harold Thornton's wife, fitting myself into a predefined role. And now I understand that true beginnings require courage, not conformity. She took another step toward him. The Sentinel will need rebuilding. Madeline and I have discussed expanding it, creating a paper that serves not just Silver Creek, but the surrounding communities as well. One that continues to stand for truth and accountability. An ambitious undertaking, Ethan observed, though. His tone held admiration rather than doubt. Yes, Clara agreed, one that would benefit from partners with diverse skills. Madeline's printing expertise, my writing and editorial experience, and perhaps, she hesitated briefly, someone with practical knowledge of the region, connections throughout the territory, and a demonstrated commitment to justice. Understanding dawned in Ethan's eyes, along with something deeper that made Clara's heart quicken. "Are you offering me a position, Miss Winters?" "I'm offering you a partnership," she clarified, "in all senses of the word." He closed the remaining distance between them, taking her hands in his. "I'm not the man most women would choose," he said quietly. "My past is part of what shaped you into the man you are now," Clara interrupted. "The man who helped a stranded woman when no one else would, who risked his life for truth and justice, who values strength of character over conformity." She smiled up at him. "As it happens, that's precisely the man I would choose." For a moment, Ethan seemed at a loss for words, overwhelmed by the directness of her declaration. Then, with gentle deliberation, he raised one hand to cup her cheek. "Clara Winters," he said softly, "when you stepped off that train, rejected and alone, I saw something in you that called to something in me, a spirit that refused to be broken by circumstance. I never imagined you might see something worthwhile. In return, then your imagination needs expanding," she replied with a smile. "Fortunately, I excel at educational challenges." The kiss that followed felt inevitable, a natural culmination of the journey they had traveled together. When they finally parted, Clara saw in Ethan's eyes the same certainty she felt in her heart, that in finding each other, they had both found home. 3 months later, the newly rebuilt Sentinel office hummed with activity as Clara finished the editorial for their expanded weekly edition. The front page featured a report on the federal case against the Thorntons, which had grown to include charges of fraud, extortion, and conspiracy across 3 territories. William and Harold remained in federal custody, their empire crumbling, as investigations uncovered decades of corruption. Silver Creek itself was transforming under newly elected leadership. The town council, now including Sam Weber and Martha Miller among its members, had implemented reforms ensuring more equitable distribution of resources and opportunities. The water rights had been fully restored to their rightful owners, and the season's harvests promised to be the best in years. "Final copy," Madeline announced, placing the completed front page on Clara's desk for approval. "We're ready to print, as soon as you sign off." Clara reviewed it quickly, noting with satisfaction the balanced reporting and clear explanations of complex legal matters. "Perfect. Let's go to press." As Madeline departed to oversee the printing, Ethan entered from the small office he'd established in the rebuilt building. As Clara had envisioned, he had become an integral part of the Sentinel's operations, handling distribution logistics and contributing insightful articles on regional issues. "Mails arrived," he announced, dropping several letters on her desk. "Including this." He held up an official-looking envelope bearing the territorial governor's seal. Clara opened it curiously, then broke into a delighted smile as she read the contents. "The governor has approved our application for the regional postal contract. The Sentinel will now be the official carrier for government communications throughout the county." Quite a victory for a paper that was burned to the ground just months ago, Ethan observed, perching on the edge of her desk. "Though I'm not surprised, you've never been one to accept defeat." "Neither have you," she reminded him, rising to place a quick kiss on his cheek. Since their wedding 6 weeks earlier in Silver Creek's newly restored church, such casual affection had become a cherished part of their daily routine. The bell above the door jangled as Tommy burst in, his freckled face alight with excitement. "Miss Clara, Mr. Ethan, there's a lady at the station asking about you both. Says she came all the way from Boston after reading about Silver Creek in an Eastern paper." Clara and Ethan exchanged curious glances before following the boy to the train station. There, standing on the same platform where Clara had arrived months before, was a young woman with determined eyes and a traveling case at her feet. "Miss Winters," she called, then corrected herself. "I mean Mrs. Blackwood. I'm Eleanor Patterson. I've come about your advertisement for an assistant editor." Clara stepped forward, extending her hand in welcome. "You're a long way from Boston, Miss Patterson." "I was inspired by your story," the young woman explained earnestly. "A woman creating her own opportunities on the frontier instead of accepting the limitations others tried to impose. I want to be part of that." Clara studied the newcomer, recognizing in her the same determination she had brought west. "Silver Creek isn't an easy place, Miss Patterson. It demands courage, resilience, and a commitment to truth above comfort." "I wouldn't have come if I wanted easy," Eleanor replied simply. "Ethan," chuckled beside Clara. "She'll fit right in." As they walked the young woman back toward the Sentinel office, Clara noticed how Silver Creek appeared to Eleanor's fresh eyes, not as the closed, fear-ridden town she had first encountered, but as a community rebuilding itself on principles of fairness and opportunity. The transformation was remarkable, yet it had begun with something as simple as the courage to speak truth in the face of power. Outside the Sentinel, Clara paused to look up at the new sign gleaming in the afternoon sun. Beneath the paper's name, freshly painted words declared its mission: "Truth stands when tyranny falls." "Our motto," she explained to Eleanor, "chosen to remind us all of what happened here and what's possible when people refuse to be silenced." Ethan's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of two people who had chosen each other freely, recognizing in one another not just love, but shared purpose. The mail-order bride, rejected for being too strong-willed, and the former outlaw seeking redemption, had found in each other exactly what they needed, not despite their pasts, but because of them. As they entered the busy newspaper office together, Clara felt a profound gratitude for the rejection that had seemed so devastating months before. Had Harold Thornton not deemed her unsuitable, she would never have found her true calling, or the man who valued her spirit as her greatest strength. Rather than a flaw to be corrected, Silver Creek had transformed her as much as she had transformed it, revealing strength she had always possessed but never fully embraced until adversity forced her hand. "I think you'll find," Clara told Eleanor with quiet confidence, "that the frontier doesn't just test your limits, it expands them." As the afternoon sunlight streamed through the new Sentinel windows, casting golden patterns across the freshly inked pages awaiting distribution, Clara knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true calling. Not as someone's wife, defined by another's expectations, but as her own woman, a journalist, a partner, a catalyst for change. Beside her, Ethan's steady presence reminded her that the most meaningful connections came not from convenience or convention, but from shared values and mutual respect. Their partnership, both professional and personal, had been forged in adversity and strengthened by purpose. Together, they would continue building something that mattered, a newspaper that spoke truth to power, a community that valued justice over influence, and a life defined not by the limitations others tried to impose, but by the courage to chart their own course. "Welcome to Silver Creek, Miss Patterson," Clara said with a smile. "You've arrived at exactly the right time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us."